All right, so this morning we talked about the 11 underlying principles of healthy traditional diets, but it can be very overwhelming to get into this, and so what I'm going to do now is look at 11 practical ways to change your diet for the better, steps that you can take one at a time so you don't feel like you have to do everything at once. So this is part 2, how to change your diet for the better. And the very first thing I'm going to say, and this may surprise you, the very first thing to learn is how to make salad dressing. How many of you make your own salad dressing? Pretty good, pretty good. It's very easy. Our four ingredients for the basic salad dressing: a good quality mustard, vinegar, preferably a raw vinegar, and this could be a balsamic vinegar if you want. Wine vinegar, apple cider vinegar, sherry vinegar, good quality extra virgin olive oil, and we're also going to use a tiny bit of flax oil, and we'll explain why in a moment. The first thing we do is just dip that fork in your mustard, and then we're going to add a little vinegar, a couple tablespoons of vinegar. You can measure if you want, but pretty soon you'll learn to do this without measuring. You stir that around. Okay, all mixed there, and now you're going to add the olive oil very slowly in a very slow stream while you're stirring with your fork, and that will make an emulsion, a nice creamy dressing without any of the yucky stuff they use in the food industry to make emulsions. Our last step is flax oil. And why are we adding flax oil? Because flax oil is a very rich source of omega-3 fatty acids. And we talked this morning about the deficit in omega-3 fatty acids and too much omega-6 in the diet. So we're going to add just a tiny bit of flax oil, and I really say tiny. It can be 1/4 teaspoon. One of the things that's happened, people have picked up on the need for omega-3s, and now they're using too much. And you can have too much omega-3 just like you can have too much omega-6. You only need a little bit, especially in a diet with plenty of saturated fat. So we're just going to put a tiny bit in there. And this is a good time for me to talk about fish oils for a moment. We talked about cod liver oil this morning. We do not recommend fish oils. They're very unsaturated, very high in omega-3s, and almost all of them are rancid. And there's no particular point in taking the fish oils. You'll get your DHA and EPA in the cod liver oil, and it's much fresher. So we really do not recommend fish oil. It's very interesting. We had a report, someone said we need to look into this. We're hearing that mothers taking cod liver oil have more bleeding at childbirth. So we actually did a survey. We used some midwives. We did a survey, and it turned out that almost all of these moms were not only taking cod liver oil, they were taking fish oils at the instigation of their midwives. And what we found was that the ones taking cod liver oil had pretty much zero preeclampsia, which is very good. And so the bleeding, yes, we found a correlation with bleeding, but we think it was really a correlation with the fish oils. This is what you want to get out of your diet. All these commercial salad dressings. Have you ever read a label on one of these dressings? First of all, it's the cheapest oils you can possibly find. Just total garbage, soybean oil or canola oil. And then read all the additives and emulsifiers and flavorings and stabilizers. And I mean, the longest list of ingredients on any food is on these dressings. And the oils in them are completely rancid. So this is the first thing you want to get out of your diet, are these salad dressings. So let's do a little comparison. On the left is the dressing we made ourselves, our basic dressing. We're using extra virgin olive oil, which is stable. It contains vitamin E. It has antioxidants in it, and it's also a source of vanadium, which is very good for the heart. We're also going to use a little flax oil, which gives us some omega-3s, also vitamin E and antioxidants. And by the way, that flax oil always needs to be in the fridge, and you never use it for cooking. You don't want to expose it to heat and air. Okay, on the other side we have our commercial dressings. made with mostly rancid omega-6 oils. Almost all of them contain trans fats, even if they aren't on the label. A lot of free radicals and all of these really toxic breakdown products. Lots of preservatives, lots of additives, lots of flavorings. I did a cost comparison. This was a number of years ago, but I found that the cost was equal. Using the best ingredients and making it myself, it was the same as the cost of the dressing. And this is the basic dressing. You can do all sorts of things with that dressing. You can add garlic. You can add egg yolks. Throw it in the blender with cream and blue cheese. You've got blue cheese dressing. You can add some tomato paste and make what they call French dressing. So there's all sorts of ways you can dress up the basic dressing. But honestly, that does not take more than 1 minute to prepare that dressing. And think of the health benefits to your family. It costs you no more. We work with a lot of prisoners, and one of the prisoners that we work with is very interested in cooking. He's out now and doing very well on our diet. He said, "Yes, but Miss Sally," he said, "I miss my ranch dressing." Can I have ranch dressing? So I looked at the label of the ranch dressing, and it's the soybean or canola oil, a lot of additives, including MSG, right here, monosodium glutamate, right here, MSG, artificial flavors. It's just garbage. You can make homemade ranch dressing, and it actually will be a probiotic food if you use buttermilk, sour cream, and so forth. So you can have ranch dressing on our diet. You don't have to give that up, but you need to make it yourself. So we talked this morning about the balance of omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. And this is an easy one to fix. First of all, you get rid of all of the commercial vegetable oils in your diet. They're mostly omega-6. Then we use a little bit of omega-3 flax oil in very small amounts in our salad dressings. And finally, we choose organic and grass-fed and animal and plant foods for a good source of omega-3 fatty acids. These are these polyunsaturated oils. They're very high in omega-6, all of them, whether it's corn oil, soy oil, sunflower, cottonseed. And what they actually do, they chill these down and take out the healthy part, the saturated and the monounsaturated. So these are usually 100% omega-6. And that's what people are eating a lot of. So, finally, I just want to say a word about canola oil. So canola oil came about because the food industry realized that people were getting more and more interested in healthy foods. This was back in the 80s. And they knew that they could not sell these rancid vegetable oils to the upscale consumer in a health food store because everybody knew they caused cancer. They're extremely carcinogenic. So they thought, well, we can't do saturated fats because we've been demonizing those for 100 years. So the only other alternative was oils high in monounsaturates, like olive oil. And that's when you started to hear about the wonderful Mediterranean diet with all this olive oil. The problem is there's not enough olive oil in the world to satisfy the need in processed food, and olive oil is expensive. So they needed a new monounsaturated oil, and that's when they came up with canola oil, which actually comes from the rapeseed. They didn't think that was a very good name for an oil. So they manipulated the oil and came up with canola oil. The rapeseed oil is associated with heart lesions, especially in the context of a diet without a lot of saturated fat. So they came up with what they thought was the perfect heart-healthy oil. Lots of monounsaturated, very little saturate, and this extra bonus of quite a bit of omega-3. And I thought this is going to be the perfect heart-healthy oil. But they did some animal studies. They found it increases the body's need for vitamin E. It caused heart lesions, just like the rapeseed oil in test animals. It increases platelet clumping and causes deaths in stroke-prone rats. So it was actually not very heart-healthy at all. But they went ahead and promoted this, and now it's really pretty much the only oil used in processed foods aimed at the health-conscious consumer. And all of the whole foods, fried foods, and so forth are done in canola oil. When they process this canola oil, the omega-3s are pretty much lost because of the heat. And it's interesting, in these studies with the rats, if they gave saturated fat at the same time, it minimized all these problems. If you want to use a little truly cold-pressed canola oil, that's fine. But I'd prefer to just stick to olive oil. Tried and true olive oil. But most of the restaurants have switched to canola oil. These are canola oil cans. They were taken behind a restaurant in Toronto. My husband took this photograph. All said canola on it. Now, the traditional diet in China, they cooked in pig fat or duck fat. But nobody's doing that anymore. So you go to a Chinese restaurant and you're getting a big load of canola oil. Heated canola oil. Not good. Okay, that's number one. That's a real easy one to do and has enormous health benefits. It's not going to cost you any more. And it actually will put you on the road to becoming a great cook. Just learn to make salad dressing. It'll give you a lot of confidence to move to the next steps. Number two, and this may cost you a little more, but it's absolutely worth it. Switch to butter. Just use butter. Avoid partially hydrogenated oils. So I want to go into a little bit into an explanation of what this process is, partial hydrogenation. So, and why do they partially hydrogenate? So the oil companies, the seed oil companies have this liquid oil that's okay for salad dressings, but they can't use it in baked goods. It's too soft in baked goods, and they can't use it for frying because it just breaks down so quickly and it's so toxic in frying. So they wanted a fat that was stable and hard at room temperature. And so they came up with this process called partial hydrogenation. And let's look at how this works. They start with the cheapest oils, soybeans, usually soybean oil, but it could be other oils. And of course, they're extracted at very high temperatures and pressures. They then add hexane, which is actually food-grade gasoline. And that gets the last little fraction of oil out of the seeds. Now, these oils are steam cleaned. That gets rid of all the vitamins and antioxidants. But the pesticides and solvents, they're still there. They say they get the solvents out, but there's still some there. Now, it's interesting. A lot of people say, well, I can't eat butter. Think of all the pesticides and toxins in butter. But you know, there's far more pesticides and toxins in something like soybean oil than there are in butter. Now these oils, okay, so these are totally devoid of any nutrition, are mixed with powdered nickel. A lot of people are allergic to nickel. And they're put in a big reactor. It'll be as big as this room. Can you imagine this room filled with vegetable oil? And then under high temperature and high pressure, they bubble hydrogen gas through. What goes in as a liquid oil comes out as a semi-solid. Actually, what comes out of that reactor looks like gray cottage cheese. It's really lumpy and it's extremely smelly. It's just kind of a nauseating smell. So then they mix in emulsifiers to get rid of the lumps. They steam clean it to get rid of the odor. And then they bleach it to get rid of the gray color. At this point, you have what's called pure vegetable shortening. The next step is to add artificial flavors. They add synthetic vitamins, vitamin A. They add, it's mostly vitamin A. And they're not allowed to add a synthetic color. They have to add a natural color to margarine or spreads. Comforting, I know. And then the whole thing is packaged in blocks and tubs. And because this stuff is so cheap to make, they have a lot of money left over for advertising to promote margarines and spread as a health food. And these companies have a real grip on our universities, on the government agencies, and on the media to do that for them. They're very subtle in their advertising. They don't just come out and say, our oil is healthy for you. They get doctors to say that for you. So it's very, very wicked, this whole advertising campaign. So I want to show you what happens when you do this partial hydrogenation process. So here's our beautiful natural saturated fatty acid. It's straight, packs together easily, makes a solid fat. And you can see that the electrons attached to the carbons are arranged in pairs. They stick out in pairs. And that makes a little electron cloud that's both stable and reactive. So it's stable when it needs to be stable, and then when controlled reaction needs to be made, it's a controlled reaction. That's the perfect configuration of those electrons. This is a monounsaturated. It's missing 2 hydrogens here, but there's still 2 hydrogens on the other side, and they're together. Again, that electron cloud, which is stable. Now, during this process of partial hydrogenation, one of these electrons is moved across to the other side. Trans means across. That's what a trans fatty acid is. The molecule straightens out. It behaves chemically like a saturated fat. The fat is hard, okay, so it's got the chemical properties of a saturated fat, but it doesn't have the biochemical properties of a saturated fat. Instead of this electron cloud here that's reactive and can make biochemical reactions in the body, this is basically a dead spot, and reactions can't occur that are supposed to occur. And these partially hydrogenated trans fats are associated with so many diseases. Heart disease, for one, this is why they've been taken out of the food supply, but also cancer, degeneration of the joints and tendons. This is why people need hip replacements and elbow replacements today. They're associated with osteoporosis and diabetes. The trans fats interfere with the insulin receptors and the cell membranes so that the glucose cannot get into the cell and feed the cell. Autoimmune diseases, skin problems, PMS, they interfere with hormone production. We need vitamin A to make hormones. Trans fats interfere with hormones. And so you'll see lowered testosterone, lowered sperm count, also all sorts of hormonal disruption, infertility. And then in children, the trans fats are just a disaster. They contribute to failure to grow, learning disabilities, low birth weight babies, reduced visual acuity. And if a mom is eating a lot of trans fats while she's nursing, there'll be a reduced amount of fat in her milk. But some of those fats will be trans fats. So even in taking formula, the baby doesn't get trans fats, but he'll get trans fats from his mom's milk if she's eating the trans fats. So the way I look at this, the liquid polyunsaturated oils cause uncontrolled reactions in the body, and the solid partially hydrogenated oils inhibit reactions in the body, and the result is biochemical chaos. And you really can't predict what's going to happen, but it'll be bad, I can guarantee you. So it's really critical. I think this is the most important thing, most important first step. More than sugar, more than a lot of other things, it's just to get off these industrial fats and oils. That means using butter, making your own salad dressing, cooking in animal fats. So, of course, the government has finally realized that trans fats are bad, and that resulted in a flurry of publicity saying, oh, now we know that trans fats are bad. They're just as bad as saturated fats. So this little chart shows you that, in fact, they have the opposite reactions in the body. The trans fats are always bad. The saturated fats are good. For example, the trans fats interfere with hormone production. The saturated fats enhance, they support hormone production. The trans fats depress the immune system. The saturated fats enhance the immune system. So they have the opposite results in the body. The saturated fats are good. The trans fats are bad. It will be a long, long time before anyone in our government or agencies admit this. I'm not sure why I have this here. I know why. So the Center for Science and the Public Interest was saying that, it's good to have local food in the schools, but we don't want to give these kids cheese. Because if they eat cheese, they're going to be eating all these horrible saturated fats. Okay? And I don't think it's any coincidence that the soy industry has created these imitation cheeses. And so this is going to be used in the schools. So here's why we have a health crisis. It's a typical supermarket shelf. All of these shelf space devoted to liquid margarine, spreads, and margarine. I live in southern Maryland, and I am shocked at what people buy down there. They have these tubs of spreads. They're literally that big. And I see very overweight people putting them into their carts. They do have butter, but it's just about 2 feet of shelf space, just like here. A little bit of butter right here, and all the rest is the industrial fats and oils. So this is why we have a health crisis today. We absolutely need to get back to butter. Butter is the healthiest fat on the planet. We're going to be talking more about the vitamins in butter tomorrow. But when we stopped eating butter, we gave away one of our best sources of fat-soluble vitamins and healthy saturated fats. And it's really our children who are paying the price today of not getting these good fats. I did a little experiment. I put some butter outside, and first I thought, well, I'll put margarine out, but people won't admit to using margarine today. So everybody uses the healthy spreads, right? So I put one of these healthy spreads out there. And the first thing that happened was a crow came along. He knew where the good food was. And I thought what would happen over time was the birds would just eat the butter and leave the spread. But what happened next was a squirrel came along. And I thought squirrels were vegetarians, but this squirrel took the whole stick of butter and ran away with it. And if you leave that spread or margarine on a plate in the kitchen, it'll get dusty, but it will not develop mold on it. It does not support a microscopic life. How can it support your life? It's just not real. It's not a food. It just looks like a food. And of course, this is the tip of the iceberg. These trans fats are in so many processed foods, and I will say they have done a pretty good job of lowering the levels in these foods, but they're still there in a lot of foods, especially in the fast foods. And the crackers and the chips and all of this. Now, if they take this trans fats out, they're using something worse, which is the liquid oils. So either way you go, they're very toxic. And the fries used to be fried in tallow. Lamb fat actually is what McDonald's used, and they were just beautiful fries. They were really crispy and they tasted good. Then with pressure from Center for Science and the Public Interest, they switched to partially hydrogenated vegetable oil. That happened in the 80s. And then with the whole trans fats revelations, they then went to vegetable oils, which is worse still because they're so carcinogenic. And that's a shame because French fries are a delicious food and they can be a healthy food if they're cooked in the right fats. Here we are at the Quickie Mart. He says, don't you sell anything without those dreaded trans fatty acids? And he says, sure, we sell cigarettes. There is one thing you can get in the Quickie Marts, at least in the South where we live, that you could eat that's actually a real food. Does anyone know what it is? Pork cracklings, pork rinds. Just make sure they're the plain ones and not with all the flavorings, the artificial flavorings and stuff. But if you're on a driving trip and run out of food and can't find anything but the Quickie Mart, that's what you buy. I took this photograph in New Zealand. In New Zealand you have a lot of fish and chip shops, and they are you tend to be family owned, they're not chains, and then we really need that. We need local fast food chains selling healthy food, and inside all this fantastic fresh fish, prawns, scallops, oysters, all fresh, and of course they're fried. I don't know about you, I can't eat a raw oyster, but I can sure eat a fried oyster. But here on the wall it said, just for you, we cook in cholesterol-free vegetable oil from Peerless. So I asked if I could speak to the owner, and he came out, and we got to talking, and I said, I'm interested in this oil that you're using. How long have you been using it? And this was back in the late 90s. He said, a couple of years. And I said, what did you use before? He said, well, it came in a big tub and it was called 90-10. And what that was 90% beef tallow and 10% some other things, usually palm oil. And I said, well, why did you switch? He said, well, I had some customers who were complaining that I was using all this cholesterol and saturated fat to fry my fish, and that I needed to use something that was healthier. And he said, I want my customers to be healthy. I grew up with all these people. We've been friends since childhood, and I don't want to hurt them. So I switched to the healthy vegetable oil. And I said, well, how do you like it? He said, well, I don't like it very much. I said, why? He said, well, it's greasier. It doesn't smell as good. The fries don't taste as good. We have to change the oil more often, and it's more expensive. And I thought, all this for, being more healthy. So I look forward to the day when all of our fast food places are locally owned using local products, and on this wall will be a sign that says, just for you, we cook in tallow and lard from local grass-fed animals. And I have good news. So last time my husband and I were in New Zealand, we went back a couple of years ago, and we stopped twice for fish and chips. And first we asked what kind of oil they used, because we weren't going to buy them if it was vegetable oil. And both of them had gone back to tallow. They said the food tasted awful. We practically went out of business because people stopped buying our food. So they went back to tallow, and people knew instinctively that it was healthier. Don't be afraid of butter. It is a wonderful food. It's a great source of vitamins A and D. Actually, also has some vitamin K, and we didn't talk much about vitamin E, but that's an important vitamin too. Butter is a wonderful source of vitamin E. Great source of minerals. The combination of iodine and vitamin A in butter make it a wonderful food for the thyroid gland. It contains something called CLA, conjugated linoleic acid, especially if it's from grass-fed cows. That is an anti-cancer substance. It's a weight loss substance. And then in all butter, all butter is good. Grass-fed butter is better, but all butter is good. You get the short-chain fatty acids. You get a perfect balance of omega-6 and omega-3. You get lecithin, which helps your body use cholesterol. You get something called glycosphingolipids, which help you help digestion. Something called the Wolzen factor, which is an anti-stiffness factor. That is destroyed by pasteurization. But the other nutrients are fairly stable. And one thing I need to add here is arachidonic acid, which is another really critical nutrient we get from animal fats. So butter is the queen of fats. It has the best fatty acid profile. It has a wonderful vitamin profile. Don't be afraid of it. Embrace butter. So that's my real second message to you. We've had this huge increase in heart disease and cancer over the last 100 years. Butter is blamed for this, but butter has declined. Butter consumption has declined during that period. So we don't know all the reasons for these increases, but one thing is for sure, it's not butter, because they're going in the opposite direction. Dr. Price did some very interesting studies. He had a laboratory, and he had butter samples sent to him from all over the world. And what he did was he measured the top line, the parabola is hours of sunlight. Then the top line is vitamin levels in the local butter. And the bottom line is deaths in local hospitals from heart disease and pneumonia. And it's a little bit hard to see, but when the vitamin levels were high, the deaths went down. And in some areas you had two peaks, a spring and a fall peak for the vitamins, and that peak was reflected in the death rates as well. And this was from all over North America. So his belief was that the cause of heart disease and infectious disease was the lack of fat-soluble activators. And it's really a wonderful study. This is something we want to do with the Weston A. Price Foundation, go back to doing these butter studies, see the variations over the year, and figure out which kind of grasses are best for getting the fat-soluble activators in the butter. This is what we call the oiling of America. Since 1909, we've had big decline in butter. Good news, just in the last few years, butter consumption has gone up a little bit. And the industry's having fits about this because they don't make any money on butter. Lard consumption has dropped way down. Shortening consumption has tripled. Now the shortenings back in 1909 were made out of coconut oil and lard. They were natural fats. Then they started using partially hydrogenated cottonseed oil. And now most are made with partially hydrogenated soybean oil. Margarine consumption, but look at the liquid oils. It's a 16-fold increase. Yeah. So this is a huge, huge problem here. We didn't have this before in our diets. So to summarize, the I actually just changed this to 6. 6 basic good fats and oils, okay? Butter, lard, olive oil for your salad dressings. I added duck fat because we've just done some analysis, and the duck fat is really high in vitamin K. And cod liver oil for your A and D, and then coconut oil. Those are the angelic fats and oils. These are the bad fats, diabolical fats. The margarines, the shortenings, the spreads, the salad dressings, the cooking oils, the Crisco, the mayonnaise with the bad fats in it, things like Cool Whip and Miracle Whip. And I really should have a little bottle of fish oil pills here too. So that's what you want to avoid. Just go back to the fats our ancestors ate. That'll make a huge change in your health. Just getting your fats right. Okay, number 3, make sure your diet contains sufficient high-quality animal products, some of which should be raw. So what do I mean by high quality? Whole raw dairy products from pastured cows. This is a wonderful animal food. We're going to be talking about it more in a moment. Eggs from pastured chickens. Meats, by the way, we just did some analysis. We're going to talk about this tomorrow. 2 egg yolks from pastured chickens will give you your 1,000 units of vitamin D. All the vitamin D you need. So eggs from pastured chicken, meats from pastured animals, and don't forget the organ meats. I know it's hard for Westerners to eat organ meats. Learn to make chicken liver pate, okay? Or learn to eat liver and onions. Have these organ meats at least once a week. Very important to get them in their diet. The organ meats are 10 to 100 times, even 1,000 times more nutritious than the muscle meats. Fish eggs, wonderful sacred food, sacred in all areas of the world. I had a Chinese woman tell me once that when she was growing up, her grandmother gave her fish eggs, salmon eggs, because that would make her good in arithmetic. Very important for brain development. Fish and shellfish, and your cod liver oil. And you do want seafood as well as land animal food. You want a nice combination. And that's really a great thing about our diet. There's a lot of variety in what you can do with our diet. So this is a sacred food. Beautiful wild salmon eggs. Eggs are a sacred food. This is the pastured poultry model. This is what we advocate, the chickens outside. These eggs are hard to find sometimes, although they are coming into some of the health food stores and markets, but contact your local chapter leader. They can tell you where to get these. They keep a food list of where to get these wonderful eggs. The chickens are outside. We know that chickens in the sunlight make a lot of vitamin D. The cow is a sacred animal. I call her a step-up transformer. She's out there in the sunlight eating green grass all day long and transforming the sunlight and the nutrients in the grass into these fat-soluble activators, A, D, and K2, that go into the butter, that go into her liver and organ meats, and a little bit into the meat as well. Unfortunately, the model today is the industrial agricultural model. This is considered modern and efficient. It's efficient in concentrating wealth in a few hands and impoverishing our farmers. And it's not only cruel to the animals, but it's also cruel to the people who eat these animal foods, as people are not getting what they expect to get from the animal foods. Very filthy. They have to use antibiotics to keep the animals alive. Now they're trying to decrease the amount of antibiotics they use, and you know what they're using instead? Arsenic. They're going back to using a lot of arsenic in chicken production. So take your choice, antibiotics or arsenic. And, we have pigs on our farm. Pigs are just a wonderful animal. They're smart. They're good mothers. They're wonderful for the woodlands. And here's what we do with the pigs. And it's just so sad. And then the cows as well. We need to liberate our animals. And the only people who really can do that is you and me, by insisting on grass-fed animal foods, pasture-fed, animals raised in a kind way. This is poultry production, and this is the organic model. This is called free-range, cage-free. They're not in cages, but they're not outside either. Okay. So that's organic. We did some studies. We found 8 times more vitamin D in the pastured egg compared to the supermarket egg. That's huge. And there actually was a study way back in 1929. They were looking for vitamin D in various foods, and the most potent source was cod liver oil, and the second most potent source was egg yolk. And they found that the vitamin D was highest when the animals were outside in the sunlight at midday during the summer, when you have that direct light coming down, the UVB light. And they could also use lamps for the chickens. And egg yolks from chickens under glass or in cages produced rickets in rats. There was not enough vitamin D there. A lot more vitamin A, a lot more vitamin D in the grass-fed butter. I made this butter from some grass-fed cream. I made this butter from supermarket cream. And so you look at the difference in color. So they add a dye to it, so you don't really know that this animal has never been outside. And look at the difference in the chicken livers. Kind of hard to see. A pasture-raised chicken liver is not disgusting at all. It's really shiny and has good integrity. It doesn't fall apart when you touch it with your finger. It's just as dark as a beef liver. And as we'll see tomorrow, it has just as much vitamin A as beef liver. This is the organic chicken liver, not quite so good. And the conventional chicken livers are just truly disgusting. Just absolutely disgusting. So this is industrial agriculture. It's ready, steady, grow. Get these animals as big as you can, as fast as you can, and then to the slaughter before they develop the really overt signs of disease. It's not about producing healthy food. It's about producing food quickly and cheaply. And one of the things I think Americans have to learn is that they do need to spend more on food. You'll end up spending much less on your medical bills, but you definitely need to spend more on food, for quality food. So this is a good segue into raw milk, a campaign for real milk, which is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation. What is real milk? It is milk that has all the fat in it. We talked about how important that fat is. You can't absorb the calcium from the milk or the minerals from the milk without the fat. That's from pasture-fed animals, so they're healthy. They have appropriate feed, so they're in the sunlight eating green grass. And finally, they're unprocessed. This means they are not homogenized and they're not pasteurized. And that's, of course, the part that really raises eyebrows. Well, the government says that raw milk is inherently dangerous and should not be consumed by anyone at any time for any reason, but especially not pregnant women, growing children, and the elderly. Actually, these are the people that need raw milk the most. So consider the calf born in the muck, and the mud, and the first thing that calf does is get up and suckle on his mother's manure-covered teat. What a terrible system Mother Nature has devised for feeding their young, right? And the modern scientist really thinks that nature has made a mistake and that they can fix that by pasteurizing the milk. Well, how is it with this terrible, filthy system that any mammal has survived? Humans or cows or pigs or anybody. I don't know if you've ever seen piglets nurse, but the mom lies down in the mud and the piglets come up and nurse in the mud. You know? What a terrible system. Well, actually, no, it's not a terrible system because raw milk is an amazing substance. It contains multiple redundant systems of bioactive components that reduce or eliminate populations of pathogens and actually create the immunity to those pathogens in the infant. So I'm just going to quickly go over these elements that are in the raw milk. And every year we discover new ones. There's two major enzyme systems. The first one is called lactoperoxidase, which uses a little bit of hydrogen peroxide, and that's produced by another component, to seek out free radicals and to destroy pathogens. And it knows where the pathogens are, and it knows what the good guys are. So it leaves the good bugs alone, and it destroys the pathogens. Quite amazing. Lactoperoxidase is in all mammalian secretions. It's in breast milk, tears, saliva. When you cut your finger and instinctively suck on your finger, that's a very wise thing to do. There's a lot of lactoperoxidase in your saliva, and that's antimicrobial for you. So you have an instant disinfectant in your saliva. Lactoperoxidase is much higher in animals than in humans because the animals are dirtier. 10 times higher in goat milk than in breast milk. And some countries are looking into lactoperoxidase as an alternative to pasteurization. The other enzyme system is lactoferrin, which is plentiful in raw milk. Its effectiveness is greatly reduced by pasteurization. What lactoferrin does is help the infant absorb 100% of the iron in the milk and also reduces the iron in the intestines, in the blood. And so pathogens love iron. And so it takes iron away from these pathogens. And TB and Candida and these type of microorganisms, they love iron. They are iron-loving bacteria. And it has been shown that the lactoferrin can significantly reduce TB organisms and also Candida. It also, it seems to be healthy in weight loss. And there's actually a spray approved by the FDA for lactoferrin on meat to keep the pathogens off meat. Raw milk is rightly called white blood because it has everything that blood has in it except the red blood cells. Leukocytes, B lymphocytes, macrophages, neutrophils, immunoglobulins, antibodies, they're all in raw milk. And raw milk creates the immune system in the infant. So raw milk would be excellent for people with compromised immune systems. It helps build the immune system. And by the way, when these components do is they create an immunity to any pathogen that the mother is exposed to. And we'll come back to this a little bit later and talk about some of the breastfeeding traditions in China. Special fats and carbohydrates, polysaccharides encourage the growth of good bacteria. Oligosaccharides, when scientists first discovered oligosaccharides in raw milk, they said this must be a mistake. Humans can't digest oligosaccharides. But then it turns out that oligosaccharides are the perfect food for the good bacteria in your gut. Medium chain fatty acids, now these are in the milk fat. They destroy bad bacteria. And phospholipids and sphingolipids also have very important roles in protecting the cell membranes, and they support digestion. Other components include enzymes that disrupt bacterial cell walls, hormones and growth factors, mucin, which adhere to the bacteria and viruses and prevent them from attaching to the gut, fibronectin, and glycomacropeptide. The list just keeps growing. Beneficial bacteria grow in raw milk, and bifidus factor in raw milk helps these bacteria grow. That's why the milk eventually sours into something like yogurt or buttermilk, which is completely safe to drink. You might not like the taste, but it is even safer than the fresh milk. B12 binding protein, this is another double duty one. It ensures that the infant absorbs 100% of the B12 and also reduces the B12 in the colon, which the bacteria need to grow in. Finally, lactoglobulins carry vitamins A and D through the intestinal wall and possibly other nutrients. Every single vitamin and mineral in raw milk has an enzyme or carrier protein to make sure that 100% is absorbed. And no other food is like that. In other foods, we absorb anything from 0 to maybe 50% of the nutrients. But in raw milk, it's 100%. So this is a 5-fold system. It destroys the pathogens in the milk. It stimulates the immune system, builds a healthy gut wall, prevents the absorption of pathogens and toxins in the gut, and ensures the assimilation of all the nutrients in the milk. No other food has these qualities. And this is what happens when we pasteurize. Here's a list of many of these components. They're all active in breast milk, all active in raw milk from other species. When you pasteurize, they're largely inactivated or they're reduced. Only lysosome remains active in pasteurized milk. It is inactivated by ultra-high temperature pasteurization, which most milk is today. Even most organic milk is high temperature pasteurized. This is bringing it over 230 degrees. Everything's destroyed. And this is infant formula. That's what we're giving to our babies. So if a pathogen does get into these heat-treated milks, there's nothing to stop it. And as a matter of fact, there have been a number of deaths from pasteurized milk in the last 50 years, but there haven't been any deaths from raw milk. All this stink about raw milk when we're not focusing on the real sources of foodborne illness. The first one is fish and shellfish. There's something like 15 deaths per year from oysters. But have they taken oysters off the market, raw oysters? No. Why? Because politicians eat oysters. When enough politicians have their children and grandchildren thriving on raw milk, all of this harassment is going to stop. Just since 1999, there's been lots of deaths from other foods, including pasteurized mother's milk, pasteurized cheese. None from raw milk. The worst foodborne illness, the one that causes the most deaths per year, is listeria. About 300 deaths per year, thousands of illnesses. The most common sources are luncheon meats and soft, unaged cheeses, whether it's pasteurized or unpasteurized. These soft, unaged cheeses can harbor listeria. There have never been any cases of listeria from raw milk. We did a literature search, we did a FOIA request, and they couldn't find any documented cases of people getting listeria from raw milk. They get Campylobacter, that's the main one that they get, and that is a much milder foodborne illness. And there have been lots of outbreaks due to pasteurized milk, including a really big one in 84 and 85. Let's see, there were tens of thousands of illnesses. And as many as 197,000 persons may have been sick. In 2007, there were 3 deaths from pasteurized milk in Massachusetts. We had the cheese deaths in Europe, 4 deaths from pasteurized cheese in the U.S. in 2012. Big misconception, the medical profession claimed that breast milk was sterile, but we now know that breast milk contains pathogens, often at very high levels. They discovered this when they were setting up a mother's milk bank in China, and they thought, we better just test this milk, and they were shocked to see how dirty the mother's milk was. And then they found out that there is a custom in China where the mothers do not bathe for the first month after their baby is born. So they're really filthy, and they breastfeed their infants during this period. and is a fabulous thing to do, because what these components in the breast milk do is give the baby immunity to every single pathogen that's there. So the more pathogens in that mother's milk, the healthier those babies will be throughout life. Now, isn't that amazing? That's not something that the people at the FDA are going to admit. Yet laws prevent mothers from obtaining raw milk to feed their babies should their own supply be inadequate. Also, the breast milk that they use in the hospitals is all pasteurized, even though babies have died from that pasteurized milk. So this mindset that you have to heat everything goes against all the science. The campaign against raw milk started in 1945 with a story in Coronet magazine, a seemingly factual article about a town called Crossroads, USA, where many died from undulant fever contracted from raw milk. There's one little problem with this article. The whole story was made up. There was no town called Crossroads and no outbreak of undulant fever. The whole thing was made up. And yet this was published in this very popular magazine at the time, and the next year this story was published in the Reader's Digest. So, a complete lie, and the lies have continued ever since. There's the Reader's Digest. Public health officials say that pasteurization was the greatest health campaign that ever happened. This is the decline in these infectious diseases over time since, I think, 1900. This is when mandatory pasteurization came in. There's no way that pasteurization can claim credit for the decline in these diseases. I call pasteurization the greatest public health disaster that was ever implemented. And today, compared to 30 to 50 years ago, we have so much more knowledge. We know how to ensure healthy cows with managed rotational grazing. We have herd testing for disease. We have refrigeration and much easier milk testing techniques. We now can test for what's called coliform with every batch of milk on the farm. It's very easy and accurate and inexpensive. There is absolutely no reason to be opposed to raw milk today. With the right regulations, enforced by people who believe in raw milk, we could get raw milk to every single person in this country and do it very safely. A perfect example is Organic Pastures Dairy, who is here today. Be sure to go by their booth. They have a wonderful display and all their raw dairy products. Only in California that we can do these raw dairy products for you. Well, we can do it in Pennsylvania also. And they've been doing raw milk since 1999. They have a superlative safety record, and there have been many recalls of pasteurized milk during the same period. So, in summary, raw milk is safer than any other food. It has its own built-in safety mechanism. It's the only food with these built-in safety mechanisms. Claims that raw milk is unsafe are based on 40-year-old science and would not hold up in a court of law. Meanwhile, pasteurized milk is causing increasing health problems in our children. It's associated with allergies, asthma, frequent ear infections. The baby comes in with ear infections over and over. The first thing the doctor says, get off milk. And that's the pasteurized milk. Gastrointestinal problems, it's associated with diabetes, autoimmune disease, and attention deficit disorder. This is a diagram of lactoferrin, one of the proteins in milk. And these proteins are beautiful objects, three-dimensional objects with very precise folds, very precise electrical charges on each of the sections of those folds. And when you pasteurize, it's sort of like bringing your hand down on a bunch of Tinker Toys. It just kind of warps and distorts and messes up these proteins. And the body would recognize this in its raw state, but when it's pasteurized, it thinks it's a foreign protein. It hasn't seen this before. So all that pasteurized milk children are drinking, or anybody's drinking, the body has to mount an immune response. And this explains why raw milk, pasteurized milk is associated with autoimmune diseases, juvenile diabetes, asthma, etc. It is the number one allergen Think of that. Beautiful, wonderful milk, been around since the dawn of time, is now an allergen for us. And the consumption of fluid milk is declining at 1 to 3% per year. The industry recognizes this. They blame it on soda and competition from soy milk and stuff. But the real reason is people can't drink it anymore. We're on our second generation of this processed milk, and people just can't tolerate it anymore. Raw milk is very digestible. The enzymes in raw milk are activated in the digestive tract, and all the nutrients are completely absorbed. The friendly bacteria aid digestion, and it's kind of a net energy gain to consume raw milk. But pasteurized milk is very difficult to digest. The body needs to supply all the enzymes for it. The proteins are warped and distorted by pasteurization, which puts an additional strain on digestion. So usually when you're drinking pasteurized milk, it's an energy loss. And a lot of people notice that their children, just getting them off of pasteurized milk, their children behave a lot better. When you switch from pasteurized to raw milk, you see a huge change in their behavior, improvement. I'd like to just finish this section with some studies on the health benefits. Now, the government says there's no health benefit from drinking raw milk. The nutrient values are the same. That's what they say. The nutrient values are the same. So this rat is brought up on raw milk. He's robust. He has got good, healthy fur. These scrawny rats were brought up on pasteurized milk, and they have hairless places called acrodynia, and that's due to B6 deficiency. All the B6 is destroyed by pasteurization. Then they looked at the bones. And the bones for the raw milk rats were a little longer, but they were also much denser. 206 grams versus 146 grams. That's a real big difference. Now, think of what this means. There's the same amount of calcium in raw and pasteurized milk. And when the FDA says there's the same nutrient value, they are correct. That's technically correct. But the calcium in the raw milk is so much more efficiently absorbed and utilized and put where it belongs in the bones. And we started off today talking about bone structure and building bodies that have beautiful, strong bones, wide cheekbones, big, wide palates. You need calcium for that, as well as your fat-soluble activators, calcium and phosphorus. And in the Western diet, milk is the best source of these nutrients, but they're going to be absorbed so much better in the raw milk. This is why we're so passionate about raw milk. Our children need this milk. It's the best source of, usable calcium, phosphorus in the diet, and it's a food moms don't even have to prepare. They don't have to do anything to it, and the children like. And it's such a relief for a mother to find a food that she knows is giving really good nutrition to her growing children. This was a guinea pig study, 1941, and this study shows us what happens to the calcium that's not going to the bones. Those on whole raw milk had excellent growth and no abnormalities. Those on whole pasteurized milk had poor growth, muscle stiffness, emaciation and weakness, and death within a year. And they then did an autopsy. And what they found was calcium streaked in the soft tissues, under the skin, in the joints, the heart, and the other organs. The calcium was not going to the bones where it belonged. It was going to the soft tissues. So by pasteurizing, you diminish the body's ability to use that calcium properly. And of course, one of the soft tissues where calcium builds up is the arteries, right? Atherosclerosis it's not, the hardening of the arteries is not caused by calcium, cholesterol. It's not caused by saturated fat. It is caused by calcium building up in the bones. And when it's very advanced, you can actually see this in the x-rays. So there's a lot of evidence that pasteurization is one of the factors in heart disease. And this is my favorite one, the Scott and Irv studies, 1931. Those rats on whole raw milk had good growth, sleek coats, clear eyes, and they were nice little rats. They enjoyed being picked up by the researchers and petted. were affectionate and friendly. They were low-stress rats. But the rats on pasteurized milk had rough coats, slow growth, their eyes lackluster. They were anemic. Same amount of iron in the raw and the pasteurized milk. But they could absorb that iron in the raw milk because they had lactoferrin. But the lactoferrin is destroyed by pasteurization. Loss of vitality and weight, and they were very irritable rats. They tended to bite when they were picked up by the researchers. It was very noticeable. It's interesting, one of the number one testimonials I get from parents who just make that one dietary change, they go from pasteurized milk to raw milk, is an improvement in their child's disposition and behavior. And I've had parents tell me, I really didn't like my kids before we went to raw milk. They were hard to control, they had tantrums, you couldn't talk to them, they couldn't concentrate, it took them ages to get to sleep at night. When we switched to raw milk, we saw an instant improvement in their behavior. And now they're really nice kids. I really like my kids now. So their grades improve, their ability to concentrate improves. Asthma is a very serious disease. 9 people a day die from asthma in this country. 9 people a day, many of them children. There have been many studies showing that raw milk protects against asthma. The biggest one was almost 15,000 children, and they found that consumption of raw milk was the strongest factor in reducing the risk of asthma and allergy, whether or not the child lived on a farm. And the benefits were greatest when consumption of the farm milk, raw milk, began during the first year of life. So quite the contrary to the claim that raw milk is dangerous, raw milk can save lives. Asthma is a life-threatening condition. Lactose intolerance. We did a survey, and we found from our survey that about 29 million Americans are lactose intolerant. We did a private survey carried out in Michigan, which indicates that 82% of those diagnosed as lactose intolerant can drink raw milk without any problem. It's not 100%. Some people really cannot do any kind of dairy, but for those who can, the raw milk is the best. It means that 24 million people, just those diagnosed as lactose intolerant, could benefit from raw milk. Raw milk is the best source of glutathione, which is a key component for detoxification. It's very high in the whey protein, but only in the liquid part of the whey that's in the milk. Once that whey is powdered, the glutathione is it's denatured and doesn't work. And this explains the success of something called the milk cure. Back in the ancient times, they gave just milk all day long, sipping milk all day long, along with some detoxification measures, and it was a really good diet for curing everything from fatigue to cancer. And because the milk is not only nourishing, building the body, but it is also detoxifying the body. So raw milk for children, you've got calcium for optimal growth, strong bones, strong teeth, protection against asthma, allergies, and eczema, builds a healthy immune system, glutathione for protection against toxins, for detoxification, and it builds a healthy gut wall. So it's a wonderful food. Beverly did some interesting studies for us and looked at raw milk. This is raw milk magnified 175 times. Notice the complex colloidal structure, similar to that of all life forms. Raw milk truly is a living food. This is pasteurized milk, same magnification. All that complex structure is lost. And it is perfectly accurate to say that pasteurized milk is lifeless. It is a dead food. This is an amoeba, and this is the cellular structure inside of an amoeba. That is the structure of life. And raw milk is alive. Very accurate to say that. And then a much, much higher magnification, raw milk resembles blood. This is what blood looks like. Amazing food. And then we have the industrial confinement system. Cows kept inside. These cows are lucky enough to have fresh air, but most of the time they don't. Average lifespan in these confinement dairies is about 42 months. A cow on the farm will live 15 to 20 years outdoors. They are bred to have huge udders. They need 3 milkings a day. That milk can't be very nutritious when the cow is producing that much. And that's manure that they're standing in. The protective components in milk are wonderful, but they can get overwhelmed. And we would never recommend raw milk from a confinement dairy. Then it is treated as a commodity. It's shipped in trucks, it goes to milk factories, and in the milk factories it goes through miles and miles of pipes. Those pipes have to be cleaned out with very strong solvents because pasteurized milk is very sticky. And we're concerned about the food given to the cows, a lot of soy, which those estrogens come out in the milk. GMO grains, which are very prone to aflatoxins. Bakery waste, yeah, they're giving donuts and candy, chocolate bars to the cows. And if there's trans fatty acids in the bakery waste, they'll be in the milk. A very popular feed is citrus peel cake. The pesticides used on citrus are the worst out there. Cholinesterase inhibitors, they're potent nerve toxins. Let's see, what do we have? Hormones and antibiotics. Now, our government brags that we test all milk for antibiotics. And now that I'm a dairy farmer myself, I realize what a joke this is. Yeah, we have to test for antibiotics every batch of milk. But that test only picks up 5 of the 26 antibiotics that they're allowed to use. So there's antibiotics there. And finally, swill from ethanol production. These huge dairies are built next to the ethanol plants. And so all of this swill is going into the cow's feed and with all of the chemicals used in ethanol production. All truth passes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Secondly, it is violently opposed. And third, it is accepted as self-evident. And we've made a lot of progress because we're here. We're in the second stage. Actually, we're kind of emerging from the second stage into the third stage. And that's largely because of the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund. They have leveled the playing field. When we set this up in 2007, our farmers all over the country were getting a lot of harassment. And it's all stopped now. So they're going to mess with raw milk farmers, they know they have a fight because this allows legal protection for the farmers. So a campaign for raw milk. We have a website, realmilk.com. A campaign for real milk. And go to the website. There's a raw milk finder where you can find raw milk where you live, and many, many articles on raw milk and raw cheese. And the Untold Story of Milk is for sale at my booth, Nutrends Publishing. It's really a very entertaining account of how we got to where we are today. Okay, we'll do one more and then we'll go on our break, and that's the hard one. This is the bad news one. Eliminate refined sweeteners. And I know how hard this is. We're kind of addicted to sugar. Do the best you can. Don't be too hard on yourself if you fall off the wagon every now and then. I'm not saying you should never eat desserts. You go to somebody's house or a wonderful restaurant and they have a dessert, that's okay, but we just want to really cut back on the refined sweeteners. So by refined sweeteners, we're talking about sugar and anything ending in OSE, dextrose, fructose, glucose, high fructose corn syrup, and the fruit juices. I really can't warn you enough about these fruit juices because they're just empty sugar, basically. So sucrose is a disaccharide that breaks down to glucose and fructose. Now, they actually did some studies at USDA on sugar, and they found that if they gave a lot of sugar to the animals, they had all kinds of health problems. And then they said, well, let's do this experiment again, and we'll do one group of rats with glucose and one group of rats with fructose. And what they found was that it was the fructose that was harmful. The glucose was not harmful. And this has led to the realization that we've made a huge mistake with this high fructose corn syrup. The fructose caused all fructose has to be processed in the liver, and so the livers resembled the livers of alcoholics. The rats were anemic. The heart enlarged. Actually, they died because their hearts just kind of exploded. It was horrible. In the presence of copper deficiency, fructose interferes with collagen production. And copper deficiency is widespread in the United States. And so what we're getting is, in these children brought up on high fructose corn syrup, is bodies that are just not very strong. The tendons aren't strong. You give them a chiropractic adjustment, they're out of adjustment within 5 minutes. Their bodies don't have a good integrity to them. Their collagen production is very poor. Delayed testicular development in male rats. Female rats were unable to produce live young, and the male rats did not reach adulthood. So high fructose corn syrup is about 55% free fructose. That fructose is actually not the same as fructose in fruit, so that's another problem with high fructose corn syrup. And the body doesn't know what to do with it. It either puts it into fat or it puts it in the bloodstream as triglycerides. And then we have agave. High fructose corn syrup has gotten a bad name, so they think, agave sounds natural. It's actually made the same way, and the agave is 95% fructose. So it's a really bad sweetener. The consumption of sugar has actually gone down in the United States, but high fructose corn syrup has gone up. So total sweeteners, it just keeps climbing and climbing. Many diseases associated with consumption of refined sweeteners. We know diabetes, hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar. That was the problem I had. Chronic elevated insulin. Heart disease. For years, the people who were saying that animal fats cause heart disease were getting paid by the sugar industry. So they wouldn't blame sugar. But there's a lot of evidence that sugar consumption causes heart disease and cancer, infectious disease, digestive problems. Any disease is associated with too much sugar consumption. Hormonal problems, of course, obesity, increased desire for alcohol, increased desire for coffee and tobacco. So sugar is the first addiction, and then the other addictions come after. Candida, bone loss, tooth decay, hyperactivity, violent tendencies, depression. It's just really bad news, and especially combined with all the other bad things in the diet. That combination of industrial fats and oils and industrial sweeteners is just a deadly one. But we would never say never eat sweet things, because it's too extreme. And you have a sweet tooth in your mouth, and it is important that be satisfied. So that's a real challenge for parents to allow sweet things in moderation. In our family, I made dessert once a week, and that was the night we either had fish or organ meats. So they had to finish their fish or organ meats before they got their dessert. So we use natural sweeteners in moderation in the presence of good animal fats. Okay? So Rapadura is dehydrated cane sugar juice, maple syrup and maple sugar, molasses, the green stevia powder is good. You don't want the white stevia extract, the green stevia powder, raw, unprocessed honey, in moderation, okay? And what we want to avoid is this blood sugar roller coaster. So you always eat sweet things with good fats, and that moderates the release of glucose into the bloodstream, so you don't get the ups and downs of blood sugar. What causes sugar cravings? Lots of theories. Wrong fats in the diets, improper preparation of grains, too few or too many animal foods, mineral deficiencies, the neurotoxic additives, the sugar and sweeteners actually cause cravings for sugar. These are all theories. I don't have any hard evidence, but one thing I can tell you is that when people go on their diet, they've often told me their sugar cravings go away. We had a wonderful letter from a gal who said she was on our diet, but she still had this secret habit when she went to the grocery store and she went to the sugar aisle, she stood there for a long time and decided which cookies she would buy, and she always bought 2 packages of cookies every week. Well, one day, after she had been on our diet for a number of months, she went to the aisle in the supermarket and she stood there and thought, now what am I going to buy? And then she realized that she didn't want these cookies. The thought of eating these cookies kind of revolted her. And so she was able to turn around and walk away from the cookies, and it wasn't due to willpower. It was just the body saying, you don't need me anymore. And that's the way it's supposed to be. And one of the things we notice is that these kids brought up on our diets, they really don't like sugar. I know my grandson went to a birthday party, they gave him a piece of cake. He said, I don't like cake. I don't want this. So we have all of these really sweet things in the supermarkets. Americans get a lot of their sugar from ice cream. We're kind of addicted to ice cream. And let me just say one thing about commercial ice cream. How many of you have actually made ice cream? Great, okay. You know when you make ice cream and put it in the freezer and bring it out, it's hard. And you have to let it thaw a little bit so you can cut into it or spoon into it. When you buy commercial ice cream and you take it out of the freezer, it's soft and creamy. Why? Because they add antifreeze to it. They add glycol components. And the creamier it is, the more antifreeze that's in there. And all of the commercial ice creams do that. Now, antifreeze is a toxin. It's very toxic to the kidneys. We have a lot of kidney disease in this country, right? And I think one of the reasons is this huge consumption of ice cream with the antifreeze in it. But you can have ice cream on our diet. You just make it at home. These wonderful ice cream makers that you put in the freezer. You don't have to do all the salt and ice cubes. It's quick to make. This is just cream, preferably raw cream, some egg yolks, some maple syrup, and a little vanilla. Just whisk that together and put it in your ice cream maker, and you've got ice cream in 20 minutes. Put it in the freezer in a shallow dish so that when you pull it out, you just leave it out for a couple minutes and then it's soft enough for you. And there it is with some raspberries or raspberry syrup that you've made. So when my kids were growing up, I always had ice cream in the freezer because I knew that they would get hungry at night and go raid the freezer, and it was always there, the really good ice cream. So again, there's no deprivation on this diet. You can have sweet things, you can have ice cream, you can have salt, you can have fats, you can have sauces, all these wonderful foods. It's just knowing the ingredients to use and how to make them. You can have grains on our diet. You can have dairy on our diet. Which provides the most energy, carbohydrates or fats. 1 molecule of glucose requires 15 enzymes and numerous vitamins and minerals, especially chromium and magnesium. The result is 38 units of ATP in your cells. ATP is the energy molecule in your cells, right inside your cells. Did you know that your cells have little motors in them? Little mitochondria. There's actually something that spins around. They're motors. And those motors need fuel, and that's ATP. 1 molecule of fat requires only 5 enzymes, far fewer vitamins and minerals, and you get 146 units of ATP. There's a lot more energy from fats than carbohydrates. All right, we're on the home stretch here. So this morning we looked at the 12 underlying principles of healthy traditional diets, and now we're looking at how to implement these practically. Number 5, we live in a toxic world. You can never do this completely, but eliminate toxic metals and additives as much as possible. Remembering that the other half of that equation is to have the nutrient-dense diet, especially with plenty of vitamin A. Vitamin A is your number 1 defense against toxins. So, toxic metals, top of the list is aluminum. You don't want to use aluminum cookware. Antacids have a lot of aluminum in there. Commercial salt, you want to use your unrefined salt. Baking powder, use the baking soda, not the baking powder. And the deodorants. And this is one of these terrible secrets about all the aluminum in the deodorant. So you want to use an aluminum-free deodorant. Now mercury, we know, is a very toxic metal. The main source is the amalgam fillings, and these are outgassing mercury all the time. Should you immediately go out and have your amalgam fillings taken out? Well, it depends. If you are doing well and healthy, I would leave them there. But if you're really struggling with health problems, you need to have them taken out by a very qualified dentist who knows how to do this. Large fish, such as swordfish and tuna, do concentrate mercury from the oceans. And I just would say don't eat them every day. If you want to have tuna fish or swordfish occasionally, in the context of this diet, with good healthy gut flora, I think that's fine. Lead, we get lead from lead pipes. We're gradually solving that problem. Some cookware glazes and enamels, some of the cheap ones, and dark hair dyes have lead in them. Iron, we need iron. Iron is a very important mineral, but unfortunately the iron added as a supplement to the white flour products is basically iron filings and is implicated in a lot of problems, chronic toxic iron buildup and so forth. Cadmium, a lot of cadmium in pesticides. So you want to certainly not eat the most highly pesticided products. Fluoride is a toxin. It depresses thyroid function. It's an enzyme inhibitor. And these two main effects lead to all of these other things that we see here. Everything from premature aging to violent behavior. The type of fluoride put in the water today is fluorosilicic acid, which is an extremely toxic substance. And it is a waste product. It's the product of the fertilizer industry and the atomic energy industry and the aluminum industry. So it's a toxic waste product. It's a real problem for them. They don't know what to do with it, so they figured out that we just gradually put in the water everywhere. And remember, Dr. Price found these beautiful people all over the world, no tooth decay. They were not using fluoride toothpaste or drinking fluoridated water. And he was very much opposed to fluoride. And his dental association, the National Dental Association, opposed fluoride. And what happened? A new dental association was formed called the American Dental Association. They promoted fluoride, amalgam fillings, and just almost overnight, most of the dentists switched from Dr. Price's group to the American Dental Association. Food additives. The average American eats 9 pounds of chemical additives per year. All of these things, I'm not going to read out this list. A lot of them are in bread, commercial breads. So we really want to get back to the artisan breads, buy our bread from small producers who are not using these additives. The worst additives are the neurotoxic ones, MSG, hydrolyzed protein, which is the same thing as MSG, and the artificial sweetener aspartame. These neurotoxins are found in pretty much all processed foods, including things like reduced fat milks, anything hydrolyzed or autolyzed, and many products containing flavorings or even natural flavorings. And usually not on the label. Highly recommend this book, Excitotoxins by Russell Blaylock. This is just one page from his book, which shows how the nerves degenerate, even at lower concentrations of MSG. If it gets through the blood-brain barrier, this is what happens. Now, glutamate is an essential amino acid. We need that. We have glutamate receptors. It's very important for us. We get glutamate from meat, we get it from broth. But the MSG, the monosodium glutamate, works in a completely different way and overexcites these receptors and causes everything from headaches to seizures. And it's pretty much in all processed foods. These are the rising rates of violent crime from 1935 to 2000. A lot of people who've looked into this believe that this is due to MSG in the food. This is when it started to be introduced to the food. I remember when my mother brought home the first packet of spaghetti sauce flavoring. And it was this powder that you added to your spaghetti sauce, and boy, did it make that spaghetti sauce taste good. a lot of MSG in there. And they were using it, putting it in baby food, usually in the form of hydrolyzed protein. And some people believe that this is why we had this big spike. Another argument is this is from the fluoride in the water. Maybe both. So we have two main artificial sweeteners, aspartame, which is sold as Equal or NutraSweet, and sucralose, which is sold as Splenda. There have been more complaints about aspartame to the FDA than any other food additive, and there are thousands of complaints, everything from headaches and seizures to weight gain. And the industry knows very well that this is a problem. They've desperately been looking for a substitute, and they came up with sucralose, thought this would be fine, but this also caused a lot of problems in animals. It's very toxic to the thymus gland, so it will decrease your immunity. The thing is, we really don't need these sweeteners. We just use natural sweeteners in moderation, and there really is no need for these artificial sweeteners. And by the way, the aspartame can be quite addictive. All right. Number 6 is all about grains, the big debate about grains. We say, be kind to your grains, and your grains will be kind to you. And this rule applies to all seed foods, grains, legumes, nuts, and other seeds. So this is a grain. It has 3 parts to it. It has the bran on the outside. That's where most of these anti-nutrients are. This is the kind of protective coating where the natural preservatives are. This is the germ that contains most of the vitamins, and the essential fatty acids are there. Most of the minerals are in the bran. And then the endosperm is the starchy portion that has the fewest. It's the source of carbohydrates, but not many vitamins or minerals. So the first way that we are cruel to our grains is we split all these things apart and sell them separately. The white part, the white flour part, to make bread, the germ is sold separately. Often gets very rancid because it has a lot of omega-3. And then the bran, as you remember the oat bran craze? Remember that? So people were eating a lot of bran, and with all the anti-nutrients in them, it caused a lot of mineral deficiencies. Another way we're cruel to our grains is we add synthetic vitamins, B1, B2. One of our speakers tomorrow, Sunday, is going to be talking about the problems with synthetic folic acid. Big problem now in the grains. Inorganic iron and bleaching agents have really never been tested for safety. So that's another way that we're cruel to our grains. Another way we're cruel to our grains is we grind them at very high temperatures, and that destroys a lot of the oils in there and many other components. This is the mill in the Swiss village. This photograph was taken by Dr. Price. And so you want the stone ground grains, which are ground at a low temperature and don't destroy the fragile fatty acids. So I think it's very important, if you're going to be doing baking, to have a grain grinder. There's several out there that grind the grain at low temperature, and you grind the grain just before you're going to use it, so you know that it's fresh. We publish a shopping guide, and we wanted to be able to include foods from the grocery store in our shopping guide, and we really try. It's getting harder and harder. But I spent a long time in the bread aisle just reading all the ingredients, and I didn't find any commercial brand of bread that we could recommend in our shopping guide. Most have all these additives. A lot of them have trans fats. Many of these breads contain soy flour and many additives, and they're not a sourdough. They're not properly prepared. In fact, a lot of these breads go through a rapid method that goes from seed to package in about 2 hours. So none of the anti-nutrients in the grains are taken care of. Don't be dismayed, though. There are many good breads available. Use our shopping guide, and a lot of people either buy the bread at the health food store or actually order these breads. And more artisan bakers are coming every day. You want sourdough or sprouted breads. I would just caution you about sprouted breads. Be sure to read the label. A lot of these sprouted breads contain added gluten. So you've taken care of the grains by sprouting them, that's good, but then you add this gluten, which is really quite toxic. And that's how you eat your bread. You want to see teeth marks in your butter. All over the world, grains were eaten with fats. The wild rice in Northern America was eaten with beaver tail fat. The typical dish for the American Indians was succotash. It was dog meat, corn, beans, and bear fat. So grains eaten with fat are much easier to digest. The more, the better. So as we said, the proper preparation of seed foods imitates the natural factors that neutralize the seed's preservatives and allow them to sprout. So that's moisture, warmth, slight acidity, and time. We are not against grains like so many of these groups are. Grains provide a lot of good things in our diets, including carbohydrates. We need carbohydrates. But there are also a lot of bad things in whole grains that, if we don't properly prepare them, are still going to be there and cause a lot of problems. Grains are the hardest food to digest, and they need to be pre-digested. This is extreme cruelty to grains. This is an extruder, and this is the machine that's used to make cold breakfast cereals. So the cereals are made into a paste or a dough, and they're put in this tank here. And then they're forced out this tiny hole at very high, with the wings closed, at very high temperature and pressure. And depending on the shape of that hole, you'll get a Cheerio or cornflake or shredded wheat. Puffed grains are made this way. Even some things like Fritos are made by this process called extrusion. This is a huge and powerful industry, and they have convinced the FDA that there's no difference between a grain that's just a grain and a grain that's been extruded. And they've managed to keep out any studies on grains out of the literature. I did a huge literature search, and there's not a single published study on the health effects of extruded cereals on animals or humans. Amazing to think, and yet we're eating billions of boxes of cereal a year. I do know of 2 unpublished studies. The first was described by Paul Stitt in his book, Fighting the Food Giants. He worked for a cereal company, and he had found that they had done a study, but locked it away in their file cabinet. They had 4 groups of rats. The first group of rats just got plain wheat berries, water, and vitamins and minerals, and they lived over a year. The second got just water and vitamins and minerals, and they lived about 8 weeks. The third got water and white sugar. They lived for about a month. But the rats who got the puffed wheat, the extruded wheat, with the water and the vitamins and minerals, they died within 2 weeks. They died before the animals that got water and sugar. The other study was done by a man named Paul Zanier. He could not get it published, but he described it to me over the phone. He had 3 groups of rats. One group got rat chow and water, and they lived a good old long life for a rat. They lived over a year. The second group got cornflakes and water, and the third group got the cardboard box that the cornflakes came in and water. The rats who got the cornflakes, the box, actually lived longer than the rats who got the cornflakes. The last cornflake rat died the day the first box rat died. The box rats died of starvation. They just got listless and lay down in their cages, and they eventually died. But the rats who got the cornflakes became very agitated. They developed schizophrenic behavior. They threw fits, they bit each other, and finally they went into convulsions and died. They did an autopsy, and they revealed dysfunction of the pancreas, the liver, the kidneys, and degeneration of the nerves of the spine. He called that insulin shock. But what I like to focus on here is this nerve degeneration. So I did find, let's see if I have a slide on this. Yes, I found a study that actually looked at these extruded grains microscopically. And basically what they found was in the grain, the proteins are highly organized in a kind of capsule. They're called protein bodies, and they're spherical. And when they go through that extrusion property, they are kind of warped and distorted and kind of thrown out throughout the grains. And these are foreign compounds to the body that become toxic and can adversely affect the nervous system. If you think of milk, the proteins in milk being pasteurized and the proteins in grains being extruded, it's basically the same thing. You're taking something the body recognizes and then warping and distorting it, and the body does not recognize it. And they can become toxic. Well, this is a bunch of cereal boxes of breakfast cereals, cold breakfast cereals made by the extrusion process. And this photograph was taken in a health food store. Okay? It's the same process. It's made the same way as all those cereals you wouldn't buy in the grocery store because they have artificial colorings and flavorings and lots of sugar. Well, these may be more natural in that sense, less sugar, but they're usually made with organic whole grains. And organic grains are higher in protein than non-organic grains. So there's likely to be more of these toxic protein fragments in the health food cereal than in the supermarket cereal. And this is how kids are starting their day. And we have an epidemic of behavior problems, lack of concentration, ADHD, all these things. Do you think these cereals may be contributing to this? They're neurotoxic, and I think the answer is yes. This is what I call a cruel breakfast. Puffed rice, extruded cereal, fat-free milk, pasteurized milk, and then a big slug of fructose in the orange juice. And I hate to say this, but the other thing in the orange juice is pesticides. Oranges are highly pesticided. The way they make orange juice today is put the whole orange, skin and all, in a big tank, crush it all up, add enzymes to get everything out of the skin, and all those pesticides go into the juice. And there actually has been a study, a very good study, the Honolulu Heart Study, but they were also looking at things like dementia and Alzheimer's, and the number one food correlation with dementia and Alzheimer was eating a lot of fruit and fruit juices. And they theorized that it was the pesticides in these juices. What we do, we make spritzers. We buy organic citrus. We squeeze 1 or 2 oranges into a glass. We add sparkling water. And that makes just a beautiful, refreshing, organic drink. And very easy to do. So you don't have to buy these commercial orange juices. This more cruel breakfast. This is what you get in the continental breakfast. Pastries, coffee, juice. I call these diabetes starter kits. Breakfast is a very important meal, and the traditional American breakfast is a very healthy meal. Great to start with eggs. This is what we call our super scramble. We add extra yolks and cream, cook it in butter. These are some leftover potatoes that we've chopped up and cooked in butter or goose fat. What a great breakfast that is. We have some fried eggs here, pastured eggs, good no nitrate bacon, and this is pineapple, which we put in the bacon pan. You really haven't lived until you've eaten pineapple cooked in bacon fat. And that's one of the things you can include in our diet. I don't think there's any other diet out there that lets you eat pineapple cooked in bacon fat. Smoothie. You want to do a smoothie? That's fine. Just make sure that you're using good whole high-fat ingredients. Yogurt, whole yogurt, egg yolks, fruit, coconut oil, little natural sweetener. Wonderful breakfast. And it's like a big, wonderful milkshake, and you can drink it in the car on your way to work if you want. Suppose you want cereal for breakfast. So we're going to make what we call a good grain breakfast. We're going to make oatmeal. So we start with rolled oats, preferably organic. We want some warm water and something acidic. It can be a little yogurt, a little vinegar, a little lemon juice, or whey from making yogurt. We put the rolled oats in warm water with a tablespoon of the acidic medium, put a cover over it, Put it on your kitchen counter overnight, not in the fridge, but in your warm kitchen. What do you have? Moisture, warmth, slight acidity, and thyme. And while you're fast asleep in your bed with your simple stomach that can't digest grains, all the little gremlins in there, the enzymes and bacteria and everything, are pre-digesting it for you. The next morning, you bring the soaked oats to a boil in some more water. You add your unrefined salt and cook that until it's soft and creamy. Then you can just turn off the heat cover and let it sit for a few minutes while it thickens up. So there's your beautiful oatmeal. You want to put something crispy on it, you can put some nuts, maybe raisins or coconut. Anyone here like sweet things? Everybody likes sweet things. So you might want to put some maple syrup, maple sugar, honey. You can do a little bit of sweet things in your oatmeal. So now you've got your beautiful oats. They've been soaked, pre-digested. All the minerals are liberated, but you need those fat-soluble activators to absorb the minerals. You also need to add fat because otherwise you're going to be on the blood sugar roller coaster. So we add butter or cream. Some people like both. I like to put butter on my oatmeal. I usually put about 4 tablespoons of butter on my oatmeal in the morning. But you can put more on if you want to. And if your kids are just piling on the butter, let them. They're telling you something. Our children are absolutely fat-starved these days. And this is a great way to get butter into your children. Let me just go back and ask, how many of you have done the soaked oatmeal from the book? Good. Coast to coast oatmeal soakers. I used to think I was allergic to oatmeal. I didn't know how to soak it. I just cooked it in the morning. And by about 10 o'clock in the morning, I would have a kind of toxic shock reaction. I'd get very clammy and sweaty. I'd have to run to the bathroom. I'd have a headache. Felt indigestion. How many of you have had that reaction to oatmeal? Quite a few. What I found is once you started soaking it, that went away. I never had any reaction to it again. And I've had other people tell me that too. So I thought I was allergic to oatmeal. Well, I was just sensitive to all the anti-nutrients. And once I prepared it properly, eat it with lots of fat, no problems. Pancakes are a very popular recipe from the book. We grind our grain. Then we soak the flour in equal parts of yogurt or buttermilk. We let it sit on the counter overnight, moisture, warmth, slight acidity, and thyme. The next morning we add some beaten eggs. We add a little butter, a little maple syrup, a little salt, and baking soda. We make our batter, and we cook those on a skillet or in a pan. And here's our pancakes. And I think that's too much butter. I say you can't eat enough butter, but that's probably too much butter. So there's our beautiful pancakes. We put a little butter on them, maybe a nice pasture-raised pork sausage, maple syrup, and this is the lacto-fermented raspberry syrup from the cookbook. So that makes an absolutely wonderful breakfast. Another thing you can do with these pancakes, you can make real tiny pancakes, thin pancakes, and put them in the oven and let them dry out till they're really crisp. Makes a great cracker. Really easy to digest cracker. And this is a sacred food, a little bit hard to see. That's caviar on crispy pancake with sour cream, creme fraiche, a little chopped onion, a little parsley on the top. Looks beautiful, tastes beautiful. And I know caviar is expensive, but 2 or 3 of these and you are full. That's all you need. So I do make a point of buying caviar about once a month. I buy the little jars. I know about $14 or $15, but this is the way I eat my caviar. The yogurt dough is a very popular recipe in the book. You have freshly ground flour, yogurt, butter, and salt. It makes a very thick ball of dough. You let that sit on the counter overnight, moisture, warmth, slight acidity, and thyme. And then you roll it out with a rolling pin. I do use unbleached white flour for rolling out the dough, and it makes a great quiche. Quiche is very rich sort of egg and cheese pie, and rich fatty foods we always serve with something like sauerkraut and maybe kombucha, because these pickled sour foods help you digest those fats. Another thing you can do with the yogurt dough is roll out little small rounds and put a filling in. And you can be very creative with these fillings. Leftovers, chopped meats, a lot of spices. This is a great place to hide those organ meats. A little chopped liver, chopped kidney or something. They'll never know. Never know. If you season it properly, that's a good way to get organ meats into them. You fold it over, pinch the edges, brush with butter, and into the oven. And you can make these in batches, and I would wrap them in aluminum foil. Be sure you take that aluminum foil off before you cook them. But you take them out of the freezer, unwrap them, put them on a baking sheet, brush with butter, and you have a really delicious lunch. My children just love these. And we usually made them about once a month when the kids were around to help me. We'd make a great big bowl of filling, 2 or 3 recipes of the dough, and just sit around and pinch edges and have fun. Okay, nuts are a seed, and they do have problems. They are pretty high in enzyme inhibitors. If you've ever eaten nuts and gotten that sort of puffy feeling in the inside of your mouth or indigestion, that's from all the enzyme inhibitors and other problems with the nuts. What we do with it, we do the nuts a little bit differently. We soak them in warm salt water for 6 to 8 hours. Then we drain them and put them in a flat pan in an oven or a dehydrator till they're completely dry and crisp. You may have to toss them a couple times. This usually takes 12 to 24 hours, and what you end up with is a very crispy, dry nut. We call them crispy nuts, and they're much more digestible than just the raw nut, much more digestible. Most of them you can keep at room temperature, except for walnuts. Walnuts have a lot of omega-3, and they need to be in the refrigerator or even in the freezer. Most of the cookie recipes in Nourishing Traditions are based on the ground crispy nuts. We use arrowroot powder, so they're gluten-free, butter, rapadura, or maple sugar, and our flavorings, and these make delicious cookies. Anyone ever made these cookies? Yeah, they're really good. Okay, number 7, make stock, that's bone broth, at least once a week. When my family was home and I had all these kids to cook for, I bought 2 chickens every week, and as soon as I came home, those chickens went into a pot. Then I had chicken for the weekend, and we would make tacos or curry or anything with the chicken meat, chicken salad. My kids love the chicken salad. And then I had broth to make soup during the week. The easiest is the chicken stock. We start off, you can either have the bones themselves or you can have a whole chicken. I like to add feet if I can get the feet. There's a lot of gelatin in the feet. A lot of our farmers do sell the feet now. Vegetables, vinegar, a little vinegar, a splash of vinegar, that helps bring the minerals out into the water. And of course, good filtered water. You let that come to a simmer. Some scum will come to the top. You just take that off with a spoon. Although I find a really good pastured chicken, there's very little scum. Industrial chicken, there's just comes up, more and more comes up. So you need to take that off. A lot of impurities are coming out in the scum. And then you just simmer for anywhere from 4 to 24 hours, depending on how rich you want your stock. There's a South American proverb, good broth resurrects the dead. And we've had lots of feedback and wonderful testimonials to the healing power of broth. Ooh, chicken heads, chicken feet. My daughter took this photograph when she was trekking in the Himalayas, and it was the market, and these were all laid out basically on the ground, and people were buying these chicken heads, the chicken feet. What for? To make soup. All over the world, the heads and feet are valued to make soup. Unfortunately, in the U.S., all the Tysons and Purdue chicken heads and chicken feet go to China. They're not sold in our stores here, which is a pity. So you really have to kind of scramble to get these. But I find that if you include these in your broth, you get a much more gelatinous broth. Fish broth, very easy to make. We use the carcass of a fish, some vegetables, a little wine, a little vinegar, and the fish broth cooks in about 45 minutes. The collagen in the fish broth comes out very quickly. And there's another South American proverb, fish broth will cure anything. Let's see. He only wanted me for my body. A little more complicated is the beef stock. You'd get different cuts of bones, and some of them have meat on them, and you put those in the oven and let them brown. And if you can get the feet of the beef, that's great. I used to have a source, and I would tell them to cut them up into 2-inch pieces. So I just put 1 or 2 in the soup pot. I really can't get these now. And now I do use a pig's foot, which is a little bit easier to get. Having the feet in the broth really makes it very successful to get the gelatin in that broth. So this is what they call in gourmet cooking a reduction sauce. You start off with 2 or 3 quarts of pale broth, and then you boil and boil until that reduces down into a thick sauce, a thick, clear sauce. That is the basis of all these gourmet sauces. They sometimes call it a reduction in the restaurants. And so it gets thickened by the gelatin. It just gets thicker and thicker. And you can add cream or butter or wine or herbs, whatever you want. Some people sometimes add a little bit of jam to this. Makes a beautiful sweet reduction. And when you put that on your meat, you're getting not only the muscle proteins, you're getting the collagen proteins. So you're pretty much getting the whole animal. And the sauce will make your meat lots more digestible, put a lot more balance in your meal, make you feel good, regulate your dopamine levels. And so again, most diet schemes tell you not to eat sauce. For us, a sauce is great if it's made the right way, if it's really made with genuine bone broth. Here are some examples of foods where they get that broth-like meaty taste without the broth, but by using MSG. So any type of canned or dehydrated soup, things like Old Bay seasoning, frozen dinners, even things like ketchup, spaghetti seasoning sauces, just stovetop dressing. These products would be inedible without the MSG. They would taste like nothing. You wouldn't want to eat them. The industry cannot function without MSG. In fact, it was the discovery of MSG that led to the proliferation of all these foods. And we now know that MSG has been linked to many diseases, diabetes, migraines, headaches, autism, ADHD, Alzheimer's. They're neurotoxins. Let's come back to obesity. And the industry doesn't want you to know this, but MSG is linked to obesity, and this is how we know. When they do studies with animals and they want to make these animals obese so they can study obesity, it's really hard to make animals get obese. And what do? They give them MSG. When they give them MSG, they just eat and eat and eat, and they become fat. And I really do think that what's in the food is causing a lot of this obesity, especially the MSG, because people just eat and eat and eat. It stimulates a lot of nerve receptors in a very pathological way and creates great hungers. So MSG is usually not listed on the label, sometimes called hydrolyzed protein. Anything hydrolyzed, anything extracted, the sodium and calcium caseinate, yeast extract, textured vegetable protein, any kind of manipulated yeast. It's actually found in corn oil. Soy protein isolate is very high in MSG because it's formed during the processing. And even in reduced fat milk, because it's formed during the processing of powdered milk, and powdered milk is added to reduced fat milk. This is a page from it's like a food engineering magazine. They're actually people called food engineers. And it's basically bragging about all of the different flavors that it can create. Everything from turkey to They have four or five different butter flavors. They have beef cooked on the grill flavor. They have beef cooked in stew flavor. They have all of these different flavors, and the industry brags that it can make imitation foods just from the basic commodity ingredients: wheat, soy, vegetable oils, powdered milk, and then use these flavorings. Add some artificial vitamins, and they think they're doing the world a favor. Okay, now we get to fruits and vegetables. You thought we'd never get there, right? Eat a variety of fruits and vegetables, preferably organic. This is one of the great luxuries of modern life. I think we need to be realistic here. In the ages past, they had plant foods at certain times of the year, but the cornucopia of fruits and vegetables that we have today is a modern miracle. And I love these fruits and vegetables. I try to buy local, but I like to eat pineapple. I like to get strawberries in October. So we're very, very lucky, and I don't think we need to turn our backs on these things. I do think it's important to buy organic as much as possible, especially avoid what they call the dirty dozen, the ones that are the highest in pesticides, and this changes every year. But strawberries are very high, celery, somebody mentioned apples, and of course the latest favorite, kale and collard greens. They're loaded with pesticides. So you want to do organic as best you can. I mean, it's not going to be 100%, but do the best you can. So some vegetables can be eaten raw. Our salad vegetables are more digestible, things like carrots. Lettuce is very tender and more digestible. And now that you know how to make salad dressing, you can be an artist with your salads. That's why I say learn to make salad dressing. It's the first step to being a great cook. But a lot of the vegetables need to be eaten cooked, and I'm really concerned about this juicing fad where people are making kale smoothies and things. These leafy green vegetables contain a lot of oxalic acid that blocks calcium, and they can cause kidney stones and stones anywhere in your body, and that's not the way vegetables should be eaten. They need to be cooked, and then they have butter or cream put on them. Cruciferous vegetables, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cabbage, contain goitrogens that need to be neutralized by cooking. Goitrogens are thyroid-depressing substances. And there's many vegetables that are just not edible when they're raw. Raw potatoes contain a toxin. I don't think I could eat a raw artichoke. Somebody once sent me a cookbook. It was an all raw cookbook, and on the front of that cookbook was an artichoke. That just turned me off completely to all raw. So just a couple examples. Spinach. We put spinach in a pan. We add a little bit of water. Cook until it's melted down. We put that in a bowl. I actually do not save the juice. I squeeze that out. Add some butter, and there's your delicious spinach. Same with broccoli. Cut it into flowerets. I use a 2-part vegetable steamer with water in the bottom. That steams the broccoli until it's tender and bright green. You know it's finished. You can put some butter on it. Put it in the warm oven. Keep it warm until it's time to eat your broccoli. This is something my husband likes to do. Just chop up a bunch of vegetables and put them in a pan and steam them. And he always says we should have 7 vegetables every meal. So that's how you do it. You can also make soup, and soup is a wonderful way to eat vegetables. We're going to make some lentil soup here. I sometimes call this bottom drawer soup because we just take all the wilted old vegetables from the bottom drawer of your fridge. Lentils are a legume, so let's just say you're running out the door in the morning and you think, oh, what are we going to have for dinner tonight? Let's have lentil soup. And by the way, I made a lot of lentil soup when my kids were growing up because it was an inexpensive way to feed them. So you just put those lentils into soak, and then you can go off to work. So when you get home, you chop up your root vegetables, you put them in the pan with some butter, and just let them cook very slowly for about an hour till they're tender. You can go off and do something else while your vegetables are cooking. Once that's done, you drain your lentils, you put them in the soup, you add the chicken broth you made over the weekend, right? And then you can put some green vegetables in. This is zucchini. And that cooks pretty quickly, cooks till everything is soft. Then you use this handheld blender, blend everything in the pot till it's nice and creamy. Then you season. I like to season with lemon juice. You can use sauerkraut juice. Something sour with the lentils tastes good. And salt. Another great seasoning is curry powder in your lentil soup. If you've got leftover meat or sausage or bacon or something, you just chop that up and put it in the soup. Great way to use leftovers. This is a wonderful soup. And the last thing is serving it. And here we put our sour fermented cream in after we've taken it out of the pot and stir around so you still have the enzymes. So you've got everything in this soup. You've got protein, good fats, vegetables, broth, seasonings, dairy food, and even enzymes in your soup. And here is a little contest for you. A little quiz. Can you guess what this is? First ingredient's water, then sugar. Maltodextrin is a kind of sweetener made from corn. Then calcium and sodium caseinate. Calcium caseinate is Elmer's glue. And remember, it has MSG in it. So we have water, sugar, another sugar, Elmer's glue. And then industrial oil, soy protein, canola oil, soy oil, so 3 different industrial oils, and then all of these artificial vitamins and factory-produced minerals. Any guesses? No? This is Ensure. Sometimes called baby formula for grown-ups. This stuff is so toxic. And yet it is given to patients recovering from surgery. Patients who are very sick. We'll do questions at the end.
Is that true
Yeah.
as opposed to like 5 years ago?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I haven't checked. This is what you need to give to people who are sick. Good soup, broth, maybe some raw milk. Somebody recovering from an operation. And believe me, I am not against modern medicine. It has a place. There's some miracles of modern medicines. If you've had an accident, if you need an operation. But there's no emphasis on nourishment. You need to nourish yourself before that operation and then nourish yourself afterwards. And the best thing for any kind of recovery is soups like this, not Ensure. Okay, number 9 is a long slide, and I could spend a lot of time on this, which I won't. I'll just go through the list. Reduce the stresses to your body as best you can. And the first one is caffeine and other drugs. You thought I was going to skip over the caffeine part, didn't you? We'll come back to the caffeine. But caffeine is a drug, and it's addictive. Reduce your exposure to pesticides and environmental toxins. Remember, you can't do that completely, but if you're getting plenty of vitamin A in your diet, you'll be able to deal with those toxins. Amalgam fillings and root canals. Dr. Price's only son died of an infected root canal that he put in. Very tragic. And then he wrote 1,000 pages on the dangers of root canals. Now, if you have amalgams or root canals and you're doing fine, leave well enough alone. But if you're dealing with a serious illness or fatigue, you need to have these taken out by a qualified dentist. And if that means losing your teeth, I think that's better than suffering from the root canal. Vaccinations, as you know, we've been a real voice against vaccinations. They're loaded with harmful ingredients. Even if it's not mercury, there's aluminum and polysorbate 80 and MSG, all going directly into the bloodstream. They don't work, and they always harm. You may not notice that harm. It may harm you in the future, or it may be immediate harm with seizures and regression, autism. But they are a big scam, and you need to avoid them. Extremes of heat and cold and dirty food, water, and clothes. Now, in this sense, we are more fortunate than the primitive people. Extremes of heat and cold are very depleting. And I would not like to go back to a village where I couldn't sleep on clean sheets and have clean clothes. Stale air in buildings can be very tiring. If you work in an office, also the partial spectrum fluorescent lights, if you work in an office with these, and I'm sure these are fluorescent also, when you have your coffee break, don't drink coffee. Go out and sit in the sunlight and fresh air. That'll wake you up and help you a lot better than a coffee break. Synthetic fabrics, especially very close to your body, I do think are very tiring. Strong electromagnetic fields. Don't sleep under an electric blanket. Don't have an electric clock by your bed. Don't live near high-tension power lines. Okay. Loud syncopated music, I think it's tiring. Microwave food, again, it's very tiring. Microwaves disrupt even the water in the food. Cell phones, okay, sensitive subject here. If you have a cell phone, try to just use it this way. And when you've stopped using it, turn it off. Beverly and I worked on a study together where we looked at changes in the blood from just having a cell phone in your backpack. So that study's on our website. And high heels. Yeah, I know they look really attractive and everything, but they are tiring. And we used to live in Washington. We'd see the young people, especially young women, with their high heels and their cell phones, and they're going to Starbucks and getting a great big cup of coffee and a muffin with their third hand. And that was breakfast. And this is just the highway to burnout. So what's wrong with coffee? Well, coffee stimulates the adrenal glands. Our adrenal glands have two parts, the adrenal medulla, which is in the middle, and that produces adrenaline for fight or flight. Then the adrenal cortex produces the chill out, healing, homeostasis hormones that bring us back, that heal. What coffee does is stimulate the adrenal medulla to produce adrenaline, and that's what wakes us up. The problem is the body is not designed to be in a permanent adrenaline rush. And primitive people understood this very well. The men would get an adrenaline rush to go hunting, but after the hunt, they just stood around for a couple of weeks, talking, gossiping, laughing, sharpening their swords. It wasn't an adrenaline rush every day. And the women, their work was much calmer. They made baskets, they sat and processed food and everything. No adrenaline rush for the women. Now, in a household, often it's the man, but sometimes it's the woman, has the high stress, high power job. They're in an adrenaline rush all day. The last thing they need to do is come home to a chaotic household where another adrenaline rush is put on them. And I think it's very important to remember this. You're in an adrenaline rush all day. You need to chill out when you come home. So we're just not designed for that. And coffee is it's like a hammer to your adrenal glands. And you eventually end up with adrenal burnout, where you can't handle any stress. And I learned this the hard way. I was a coffee addict. I had a lot of health problems, a lot of fatigue, and I went to a wonderful holistic doctor who looked me in the eye and he said, I cannot do anything for you until you get off of coffee. And I'm so grateful to that man because he was so emphatic. I went home and stopped drinking coffee, and I had a 1-month withdrawal with headaches every day. But I was so glad afterwards because I had much more energy afterwards, and a lot of health problems cleared up by getting off of coffee. I know it's difficult, and some people just can't do it. It's extremely addictive. So in that case, you want to have extra cod liver oil, extra vitamin A to nourish your adrenal glands. This was from a book called Caffeine. These are spider webs. This is a spider given marijuana, benzodrine, chloral hydrate, and the most chaotic web was the spider given caffeine. The satirical paper, The Onion, used to be much better than it is today, much funnier. Brain forced to run entire body on muffin and frappuccino. It just can't do it. So instead of junk food and muffins and bread and rolls based on sugar, white flour, and trans fats, eat real food for breakfast especially. Eggs, meat, cheese, pate, liverwurst, nuts, real nutrient-dense foods. Instead of caffeine beverages, drink whole raw milk, broth-based soups, kombucha, or other lacto-fermented beverages. I don't have a slide on this, but I find if I'm getting sleepy in the afternoon, what I do is I put a tablespoon of molasses and a tablespoon of coconut oil in a mug and a pinch of powdered ginger. Add hot water, and it's a great pick-me-up drink without stressing your adrenal glands, because that coconut oil boosts the metabolism in a natural way. Number 10, put the principles of lactofermentation to work for you. Familiar lactofermented foods include natural cheese and yogurt, old-fashioned pickles and sauerkraut, gravlax, which is fermented salmon, traditional salami. We're going to spend a few slides showing you how to make these foods. They're very easy, but even if you don't want to make them, they are very available now. Most health food stores even carry lactofermented foods. And the true lactofermentation, there's no sugar, no vinegar, no pasteurization. Alcoholic fermentation is the action of yeast on sugars, and the result is alcohol. Lactic acid fermentation is the active action of bacteria on sugars, and the result is lactic acid. Both alcohol and lactic acid are preservatives, but the lactic acid doesn't make you drunk, and the lactic acid is very good for you. So the benefits of these foods is that the benefits of lactofermentation is that the foods are preserved not by destroying the nutrients, but increasing the vitamin and enzyme content. The vitamin C in sauerkraut increases tenfold when you make sauerkraut. Tenfold increase in vitamin C. Adds lactic acid and beneficial bacteria. There's more beneficial bacteria in a spoonful of sauerkraut than in a whole bottle of probiotic pills. Neutralizes anti-nutrients and improves digestibility, breaks down difficult to digest proteins and carbohydrates. Best of all, it promotes small-scale rather than monopolistic farming and food processing. And a lovely example is a Russian woman living near us who makes sauerkraut, different types of sauerkraut that we sell in our farm store. And she is making a decent living, her own entrepreneur, her own business, just making sauerkraut. And it's something that did not require a lot of investment. It wasn't hard to get started, and she's doing really well with this. So we want thousands and thousands of people making these lacto-fermented foods. So there are two basic pieces of equipment that you need and two basic ingredients. The equipment is these quart-sized mason jars. You want the ones with the wide mouth. And then you want some kind of pusher or pounder. This is a wooden hammer, but there's also, we have a kraut pounder. Just Google kraut pounder. One of our chapters makes these, and they're really great. Then the two ingredients are good unrefined salt and homemade whey. So you first have to make this whey, and you start with a good quality yogurt. You line a strainer or colander with a kitchen towel. You pour in the yogurt. I know it's hard to see here. And then you put a plate over that, and you let the whey, the yogurt solids stay in the cloth, and the whey drips into the bowl. So you end up with a kind of yogurt cheese. It's called quark. It's really delicious mixed with maple syrup. And then you take your cloth and tie it over a spoon or something. Let it keep dripping till all the whey comes out. And you end up, for a quart of yogurt, you end up with about 2.5 cups of whey and 1.5 cups of cream cheese. Delicious homemade cream cheese that you can use. Okay, let's make some sauerkraut. Now here, the quality of the vegetables is really important. You want organic, if you can possibly find it. You shred up the cabbage, slice it up fine. You toss it with the salt and the whey. I usually add caraway seeds. And then you pound You pound until the cabbage gets limp and juice starts to come out of it. Then you put the cabbage into a jar. You push down with your pounder until the liquid comes over the cabbage, and then you seal that tightly and leave it on the kitchen counter for 2 or 3 days. That's all you do. And then you put it in the fridge, and in about 2 weeks you have a really delicious sauerkraut. So easy to make. Pickles. You put the pickles in a jar. You make a mixture of salt, whey, water, and spices. If you can add an oak leaf or a grape leaf, there's some tannin there that will keep those pickles crisp. 2 or 3 days on the counter in warm temperature, and then into the fridge. And in a couple of weeks you have cucumber pickles. This is one we used to make with raspberries. We would put the raspberries in a jar, and then we would mix them with little whey, salt, and a natural sweetener like Rapadura. Gently push the raspberries down into the jar, and then we add our mixture, and that should come to the top, cover the raspberries. This is my son, who became a chef eventually. And then on the counter for 2 or 3 days, and then in the fridge. And it's amazing how long those raspberries will stay fresh and intact. Peach chutney is, this is a recipe from Nourishing Traditions. It's got a lot of spices in it, some raisins and things, and the whey and salt, and they are put into jars on the counter for 2 or 3 days, and then into the fridge. Ketchup. A ketchup, believe it or not, was originally a fermented food. The word ketchup comes from Chinese kaut soup, which means fermented fish liquid. So what did they do in the past? When they caught fish, they took off the fillets. Those were smoked or salted. All the guts went into a barrel with some salt water, seawater, and they had a little plug at the bottom. That's where the liquid came out. The oil rose to the top, and that was the oil, the fish liver oil. And that liquid was a preservative, and so if they put mushrooms in the fish sauce, they'd get mushroom ketchup. And if they put tomatoes in, they get tomato ketchup. They actually made oyster ketchup, put the oysters in the fish sauce. So that's why we actually say fermented tomato ketchup, because there were different types of ketchup. Well, that's not how ketchup is made today, right? It is made with high fructose corn syrup, MSG, a lot of bad things. So we can make lacto-fermented ketchup. We use organic tomato paste. Here's our fish sauce, homemade or commercial, seasonings, whey, and salt. Mix that all together and put it in a jar, leave it on the kitchen counter overnight or 2 or 3 days, and then into the fridge. And you have a delicious lacto-fermented ketchup. You can also do that with mayonnaise and mustard. These can be lacto-fermented foods as well. Then we get to beverages, and I don't think any of you need any convincing that we shouldn't be drinking soft drinks, okay, commercial soft drinks. They're loaded with either concentrated sweeteners, usually high fructose corn syrup, or aspartame, which is the artificial sweetener, lots of caffeine. I mean, the combination of caffeine and these concentrated sweeteners is deadly. It's just deadly. Phosphoric acid, which is really bad for the bones, artificial flavors and colors, you don't know what kind of water. The price is getting up there, about $1 a quart. Compared to the lacto-fermented beverages, which have dilute sweeteners, minerals, enzymes, bacteria, lactic acid, all very good for you, natural flavors, and good quality water. And you can make these for as little as 20 cents a quart. Especially, how many of you make kombucha at home? Yeah. And so Americans consume 56 gallons of soft drinks per person per year. Can you imagine how much that is? And that's including those of us who don't drink any soft drinks. But one of the things that we have to offer in this dietary plan is lacto-fermented soft drinks that are healthy for you. This is our lacto-fermented ginger ale. It's just ground up fresh ginger or grated fresh ginger, fresh lime juice, Rapadura or honey, whey, salt, and water. And we put those in jars or in bottles, and if they're in these bottles with the real wire stoppers, it'll get fizzy. And it's real easy to make this. And you have ginger ale. 2 or 3 days on the kitchen counter and then in the fridge. And after about a week, they'll get really fizzy. In fact, you really should bleed them every day, open them every day to make sure that the carbon dioxide doesn't build up too much. Beet kvass is one of the most successful and popular recipes in Nourishing Traditions. We've had so many people recover from fatigue and digestive disorders with the beet kvass. And this is medicinal. You wouldn't serve it at a table like wine or anything. It's just chopped up beets, whey, salt, and water. And you leave it on the counter for a few days and then in the fridge. And this is my tonic. This is what I have morning and night, just about a half a cup morning and night. And it's just fantastic for your digestion, for your strength, stamina, for fatigue. There's a lot of really interesting nutrients in the beets that can help you also. And a lot of these beverages are commercially available. Beet kvass is commercially available. We now have over 100 companies in this country making kombucha. You can even buy it in some of the grocery stores today. And we have several brands here at the conference. And this sour grain drink, as I said, made in Australia. Look forward to the day when this kind of beverage will be made here. Unfortunately, the world has been Coca-Colonized. This photograph was taken in Zimbabwe. Now, the Africans have a lot of different wonderful lacto-fermented beverages, and there's actually a factory in Zimbabwe that makes the old, what they call sorghum beer, which is the lacto-fermented beer. But this is considered very old-fashioned, and if you're young and cool and hip, you drink Coca-Cola, and very, very sad. So I call this Coca-Colonization. And this last picture is really shocking. These are Amish kids living without electricity, horse and buggy, clothes held together with pins, and they've come into a little country corner store to buy Coca-Cola. Really sad. All right, number 11 takes us beyond food in a certain way, but it also is very scientific, and that is to practice forgiveness. We know that when you are angry or holding a grudge or under a lot of stress and you sit down to a meal, your stomach actually contracts into a kind of hard ball. And it's very, very difficult to digest your food. We know this. So we're very much in favor of the family meal. But those family meals need to be relaxing, not stressful. So we always had a rule, no unpleasant conversation at the table. And no scoldings at the table. You don't want to dress down a child in front of everybody else. And I've had people tell me that their family meals were so unpleasant and so humiliating that they ended up hating family meals. They only wanted to eat alone. That's really sad. So you practice forgiveness, and the first person you forgive is yourself. Okay? We all made mistakes. And sometimes I feel even badly even starting this presentation because everyone's saying, oh, think of what I did to my kids. Think of what I fed them. But we all make mistakes. It's part of the learning process. The main thing is to realize the mistakes and just move on. I made a lot of mistakes too. It makes me cringe. So you forgive yourself. You forgive your parents. We know they made a lot of mistakes, right? They made lots of mistakes, but they were doing the best that they knew how. So we forgive our parents. We forgive our children, especially our teenagers. Forgive our teenagers. I tell you something, they actually do sooner or later rejoin the human race. So they do improve over time. You forgive these people selling Coca-Cola. They are trapped in a system. And there's only one way that you will free them from that system. It's not by influencing government officials. It's by not drinking the product. And the more and more people don't drink these products and eat these foods, the more these people will be free because they will lose their jobs and look for something else to do, like maybe making sauerkraut or kombucha. Okay. But we're not going to change it up there. But we can change it down here by just Every person who starts to eat real food and buy it from conscientious farmers, you are changing the system. And when we have enough people doing this, there will be really big changes. This lovely lady, she's passed away now, but she was 104 years old in that photograph. She was the grandmother of a friend of mine in South America. One thing I find is that the South Americans really get this because they remember their grandmothers did it. I've had them tell me, oh yes, when my grandmother was alive, we made broth, we took cod liver oil, we made our own sourdough bread, and we ate organ meats, and when my grandmother died, that all stopped. So we need to bring back what the grandmothers did. But this lovely lady is from Ecuador. She was a real spiritual force in the village, the kind of person that the young people would come and talk to. She soaked her grains. She made her own cheese and drank the whey. That was her lacto-fermented food. She did all her own cooking, everything fresh, and she lived to 104 years old. And this is the next generation. These are the young people that we absolutely have to reach if we are going to change things. The young women of childbearing age are our hope for the future, and if we can't support them in every possible way, we are sunk. Okay? So we like to talk about raw milk grannies. Your daughter is busy and working and has kids or is pregnant. You be the one to bring the raw milk to her. You find it and figure it out and be a raw milk granny. Any way you can help and support these young women, because so much pressure is put on them today. Most of them have to work, and whether it's financial help or just encouragement or help out in the kitchen, whatever we can do to help these young women is what's required right now. Because the hope of the future is on their shoulders. Our future is in their hands. Gives a very different perspective, doesn't it? Okay, the Weston A. Price Foundation is a nutrition education foundation. Dr. Price's dying words were, you teach, you teach, you teach. Traditional cultures knew these things instinctively. We have lost that instinctive knowledge. We've lost that connection with what they call the dream world. We have to get through this through science and through teaching, with our intellect. And that's why we were founded. We produce a lot of interesting informational brochures. Be sure to stop by our table and pick those up. We publish a quarterly magazine. We have a yearly shopping guide. Guess what? We have an annual conference. And we have almost 600 local chapters worldwide who are helping people find these wonderful traditional foods. Many of them put on potlucks and classes and getting this information out to people. We have a huge website. If you're new to our website, there's a tab called Take a Tour, and you can get started that way. Our shopping guide is now finally available as a real interactive app. We're going to be announcing this at our banquet. To get started, we have our Healthy for Life Dietary Guidelines booklet, very colorful, based on 4 food groups: animal foods, including dairy, grains, legumes, and nuts, vegetables and fruits, and healthy fats and oils. We're the only dietary guidelines that includes the healthy fats and oils. We do have a couple of special issues, healthy baby issue and the heart disease issue, and they're available at our table. Books from New Trends Publishing, starting with Nourishing Traditions and all of the companion books that go with this, including the Nourishing Traditions book of baby and child care, and the latest book, the Nourishing Traditions Cookbook for Children. We've had a lot of adults say this is easier for them than the big Nourishing Traditions book. Dr. Price's book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, is really must-reading, especially for health professionals. It's available from Price Pottinger Nutrition Foundation, who will be here this weekend, or you can get it on Amazon. And it's now in paperback. It used to be a very expensive book. It's much more affordable now. Okay, so to sum up, everything we everything they did in traditional diets, from the type of agriculture they did, from their fertile soil to their their food choices, to the way they prepared things, to the way they cooked things. Everything they did in traditional diets maximized the nutrition. There was nothing like minimum daily allowance or a minimum daily requirement. It was abundance. We want an abundance of nutrients so people reach their optimal development and so people can deal with any kind of stress in their lives. Everything that we do in the modern diet is aimed at convenience and shelf life. From the way we farm, to our food choices, to our food preparation methods, to the way we cook, even to the types of seeds we use. Everything is designed for convenience, and all of that minimizes the nutrition in our food. There are many healing methods out there, and the Weston A. Price Foundation embraces all of them because many of us need more than nutrition. Homeopathy or chiropractic, even conventional medicine has its place. But 80% of healing is here. And all of these other things come on top of this. Those methods pretty much go to waste if you can't get back to nutrient-dense foods. So that's our underlying message. Nutrient-dense foods, that's the most important part of your journey to health. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right, we have lots of time for questions and answers. I'm happy to stay as long. So if you have a question, you're going to go up to the mic so everyone can hear your question, and we'll be very orderly about this. Okay.
Concerning eating egg whites raw, I understand there's averban, is it, that deletes biotin? Can you talk about that?
Yes, well, there is a substance called avidin in egg whites that blocks biotin, but there's also enzyme inhibitors in egg whites. Egg whites, an egg is a seed, basically. And there's enzyme inhibitors there. So the egg whites, when they're raw, are quite hard to digest. I'm not saying never eat them, but I wouldn't have a raw egg smoothie every day. I think you can get into digestive problems. Now the yolks is different. The yolks you can eat raw. So you would have your cooked eggs or maybe raw yolks in a smoothie or something like that.
Hi, I've always been told that meat has to be organic. Now, if it's pasture raised, is that the same? Is it better?
Yeah, unfortunately the word organic has been watered down. Yeah. And now organic meat typically is confinement but with organic feed. It's better than the conventional, and if that's your only choice, that's where you should go.
But pastured
But the pastured is the best, so it's conventional, organic, and then pastured. And this is one of the things our local chapters are doing. They are creating these food groups so that people can find these pastured animal foods. The one caveat is that sometimes, or many times, that meat is too lean. So we want to encourage these farmers to raise fat animals and to have the butchers keep the fat on. A lot of times the butchers cut the fat off, and it's a real uphill battle. But grass-fed is definitely best.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Sally. My name is Vivian. I wonder what you think of pressure cooking and how to do it.
Yeah, we did include a recipe for pressure-cooked broth in our book, and I know people use pressure cookers all over the place. I'm still skeptical of what they do because in pressure cooking you are going above the boiling point. Mm-hmm. Even if it's a little bit above the boiling point, it's not something very natural to me. And maybe Beverly can comment on that. I'm also kind of scared of pressure cookers.
I'm not, but anyways, they
really
do make good bone broths and things like that.
I like the slow cooker. I think they're just wonderful, and you just throw those bones in the evening, and you've got broth the next morning.
Thank you.
Just as easy, yeah.
You mentioned earlier that older women like myself should not be fitting into our prom dresses. There's some health benefits to maybe having a little more weight, which is a very liberating statement, by the way. And I was wondering if you could expound on that a little more. And also, is there a good home cream separator that you could recommend?
Okay, on a cream separator, I think that's a great question. I wish I had one because separators are just a pain. Cream separators, they're a pain to wash. I don't have one. If you find one, let me know. And then the other thing about letting yourself gain a little weight, well, actually, most women everywhere in the world, including primitive societies, gain weight in menopause. And so usually not a problem. The problem is not gaining too much weight. But you want to fill out just a little bit. And it usually means stronger bones, a little bit more muscle. When you go through menopause, you tend to gain a little weight in the stomach, and that fat produces estrogen, which takes over from the estrogen that your ovaries are not producing anymore. And it's a very calming type of estrogen. It's called estrone. So, yeah. And you know, another thing about fat, it contains stem cells. Lots of stem cells and fat. So if you've injured something, those stem cells will produce replacement cells. So again, you know, we don't want to gain too much weight, but I think it's normal and natural to gain a little weight.
Hi. What about fixing chia or hemp seeds? Some of them in beverages, like in kombucha already.
Yeah, I know they're putting chia seeds in beverages. I just don't know. Chia seeds are one of these low phytic acid seeds, so they don't need to be soaked. I don't find them particularly pleasant, but I have no objection to the chia seeds. The hemp seeds, I think, are more of a problem because there are cannabinoids in the hemp, and it was never used for a food except in times of starvation. In England, they had something called the silly season, where they'd run out of all the other grains, all they had was hemp seeds, and people got kind of silly from eating the hemp seeds. I don't think it's a great idea. I think we're making a big mistake with the hemp. I think we should be using hemp for clothing and paper and not as a food. But that's just my opinion.
Hi, I have a question. I have two questions. One is in regards to fats. I love butter, and we've been working with the GAPS protocol for about 3.5 years now, and so we've been learning and we've been consuming, and I've been little by little desiring more and enjoying that. And my wife and I had this conversation, like, "What? Isn't that too much?" And so we have the question: is how do you know if it's too much? And I mean, obviously, I answered the question myself. I said, well, if I was answering the question, I'd probably say, well, maybe it's because you would feel it how you feel, your digestion, or if there's any reaction. But is there anything that you have to say about that? And also, is there a way to measure it, or in terms of blood tests or anything, levels or anything that should be watched? I
think we get very fixated on measuring things and looking at numbers. I think your body has a much better signaling program for fats than carbohydrates. And if you've eaten too much fat, you feel it. You just feel kind of nauseous. And there's a word for it in French called crise de foie. You just don't feel good if you've eaten too much fat. So your body knows when to stop. But it's not so true with carbohydrates. You kind of overindulge. I've had people tell me when they got on this diet, they gave themselves permission to eat fats. They just gorged on fats. Their bodies needed fats. And then after a while, maybe half a year or something, they didn't need as many fats. But their body was trying to make up for things. And that was actually my experience when I went to France as a student and I discovered a food I'd never eaten before, and that was pâté. And when I ate that first bite of pâté, I was like, oh, this is what I need. This tastes so good. And I was eating pâté morning, noon, and night because I was depleted of all the vitamins that you get in pâté, A, D, and K. But now I can't eat a lot of pâté. After 2 or 3 spoonfuls, I'm full. So I've dealt with the depletion, and now my body tells me you don't need that much. So I really think your bodies are very wise, and I would just listen to your body.
Thank you. The other question is, in regard to milk, I've noticed with myself, and I've watched with others, but I can't measure it with whether it's with raw milk or regular milks, but in unfermented, in lactose products in general, milk, that sometimes it builds and it produces a mucus effect. And I have found over the years, if I have too much or eat regularly dairy products, even if it's just cheese, and it's good quality, but not necessarily all aged or fully fermented or raw. I find if I get sick, I'm sick longer. Or I have longer period of time where I'm producing mucus, and when I don't, and I'm having more fermented dairy or just not that much dairy, that when I do have even a minor symptom of a cold, it goes away very quickly, and I find it's something to do, seems like it's something to do with the mucus. And I'm just curious regarding milk or your experience or what you understood, if that has, if you have anything to say about what I call almost something like a mucus factor regarding milk.
They've actually done studies on mucus in milk, and they found that soy milk caused more mucus than milk. I don't know, maybe that mucus is a good thing. Maybe it's a detoxification thing caused by the glutathione in the milk. And I think whether you drink unfermented milk or fermented milk is a very personal thing. Personally, I do not like yogurt and kefir and all those things. They're too sour for me. But I thrive on just regular raw milk. My ancestors were Swiss, so there's a lot of tolerance for dairy products there. But I think everybody's different. You're just going to have to ascertain what is going to work for you. And that's, again, we don't give any hard rules about the specific foods you should be eating. Some people can't do dairy at all, Some people can't do butter at all. Some people thrive on these foods. Some people need red meat with every meal. They have a very high requirement for zinc. So again, there's no hard and fast rules. And so the details of your diet you have to figure out yourself. Okay. And the mucus is, it's one of the signs. Probably not a good sign that,
Excess, when it's something where it's taking weeks.
Yeah, and just gauge your reaction to it. Yeah. Gauge your reaction. I'll tell you something that I get a big reaction to is chocolate. If I won't say I've never eaten chocolate, but boy, I know for several days if I've eaten chocolate. So
I'm the same way. Yeah. Not raw chocolate, but processed chocolate.
Well, anyway, whatever chocolate I eat is not good for me. That I know.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. Can you freeze the broth?
Oh, yes.
Because that's what I do, and I haven't heard that
We do
mentioned
freeze the
before.
broth. We talk about that in Nourishing Broth and the different ways of freezing it. And yes, I've got 2 shelves in my freezer full of broth.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I make a lot at one time.
Okay. And then you were talking about the sugars. I had always heard that agave is high in fructose because they process it, but when they actually just take it straight from the nectar, it's different? Is that not correct?
Yeah, there's 2 different things. There's agave nectar, which apparently comes from the flowers, but that's not, it's very expensive. That's not what is being sold in the health food stores. So the process for high fructose corn syrup and agave is they start with glucose. They start with starch. And it's a big enzymatic conversion to fructose. It's a very unnatural thing. And it involves a lot of chemicals. They say it's absolutely disgusting to look at. And then they get the high fructose corn syrup. And I don't understand all the science here, but my understanding is, 1, that fructose is free fructose, which is not good. Usually fructose is bound with the glucose. And 2, it is actually not exactly like the fructose in fruit. So the body is foreign to the body, and the only thing it can do with it is either put it into fat or make triglycerides with it.
So the ones that say raw agave are not necessarily raw?
It's not a product requiring heat. There's no heat involved. It's enzymatic.
Oh.
So it doesn't mean anything, really.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Well, this is a good stopping time. We are just about at 5 o'clock. We have exhibits now from 5 to 6, so please go around. We have some great exhibitors. The ones today are our sponsors. Then tomorrow we open the exhibit hall for all of our exhibitors. We have more exhibitors this year than we've ever had before. So please go see the exhibitors. And then at 6 o'clock, 6 to 8, or is it 6:30 to 8? Let's just check. We have dinner. Let's see. 6:30 to 8 is dinner, so we have an hour and a half. And this is a time to see the exhibitors. And then at 8 o'clock, we have our evening sessions from 8 to 10. And we'll see you there. Thank you. Thank you.